Pardon me? Oh, is that chili?
This is a turkey.
Oh my gosh. Leftovers from the Christmas turkey still? No.
Looks good.
Yeah, I know.
I think this will be my last year on the board, but I'll still volunteer. And again, I guess after a year, you can come back.
I was away for 2 weeks ago, and I just at home for Christmas, but I started on Monday, and Monday we had all day interviews, so Brody had, I don't know about you in your ways, it's like you pay for it at the start, and then before you go, and then you go away, and it's like, you forgot you were working on it. And I got so many return calls or whatever, in some ways it's like, okay, now I just can only think of this.
Hey Kevin, how are you?
Right now.
Gotta get her.
Good. Happy New Year.
Gotta get her reading. I got support down there.
Yeah, we stick together.
That's right too. Fire's using 10% of the budget, so we gotta stick together. Or stop between the depths.
You did this over Christmas.
The only one that
Brutal in terms of weather or
because of those. We'll deal with that as a separate issue. We don't
is
mind
this
doing it.
before Christmas? We had a huge snowfall in Portland, I think, just a couple of days ago or yesterday. good. It's nice to get away.
Be thankful you're not in Winnipeg right now. Have you seen their weather?
Minus 45.
Yeah, something.
Where's Ray?
He is at Harrison. It's when the recreation ministry have a.
At Harrison Hot Springs. Sounds tough.
Let's send him a few emails during the meeting.
Yeah,
see if he
right.
replies.
Welcome, everybody, to our special strategic priorities session. We started a few minutes late because we were just kind of getting the live stream all arranged, and I understand now we're properly up and running, so people at home can enjoy the debate and participate in that way. We have an agenda. I'm just going to make a few opening remarks, and following which I'll turn things over to Gary Nason, who's been the consultant on this. You may remember on November the 4th, we had an all-day council priority session with the goal of continuing to advance the strategic directions that we had set in 2014. So this is a follow-up to that meeting. You may also recall that the strategic directions that we settled on as a council in 2014, there were 6 of them. 1, proactively support reasoned community growth. 2, focus on being well-managed and well-governed to serve our residents. 3, take an active role in building a safe, livable community. 4, develop, maintain, and protect our infrastructure. 5, recognize the importance of diverse transportation options to building our community. And 6, working closely and collaboratively with our regional neighbors, and that, of course, also includes the First Nations who we've been building bridges with. Now, you will see in the staff report that staff have recommended that we add a 7th strategic direction, and that's as a result of a lot of discussions around a heritage, the HCA, and other issues. So the 7th that's being recommended by staff is recognize and support our unique character and heritage. So we've been working on these first 6 for some time, and I think we can be somewhat proud, and I'm certainly happy that over the last 2 years we have completed many of the objectives and activities that flowed from those 6 strategic directions. So we have been moving forward. And today is really, and along with the November 4th, is really Council's initiative to update the strategic priorities and objectives to ensure that they align with the corporate activities and we continue to achieve these community goals. It's kind of, if you will, a kind of a midterm check-in. We're about halfway through now, just a couple of months past the halfway mark of this council's mandate. And part of the check-in is to make sure we're still online, on course to achieve these strategic directions, and to see if there are new initiatives or objectives that we want to add, consider, and are there old ones we want to want to discard. So it's a matter of just kind of saying, where are we now? Are we on the right course to achieving those 6 and possibly 7 strategic directions? And then staff took away what we did first session on November the 4th, and they reviewed the highest priorities in terms of cost, resource implications, and also timing, the sequencing between now and the end of this term. And we have a package that's online. Some of us have hard copies, which in addition to an agenda, a detailed agenda, which we're going to get to in a minute, there's also a Council Strategic Priorities memo from our Chief Administrative Officer, Helen Koning. And attached to that are a number of appendices, one of which is a draft council priorities as attachment A, but the one I'm referring to, which is in terms of the cost, resource implication, and timing, appears as attachment B, and it is the work of our staff in order to kind of get a sense of if we're going to move in a particular priority direction, what implication does that have for things like resources and capacity and this type of thing. So what council, what the staff have also done is some proposed priority plan that staff have put together based on our strategic directions, based on the work we did on the 4th of November. And the plan has been organized in order to demonstrate how council priorities could continue to support the strategic directions that we've identified in 2014. So the proposed plan is really based on the 3 factors. One are the priorities that we identified in the 4th of November session. 2 is council decisions and presumed decisions that we've had since that time. For instance, the Heritage Area Initiative. And also 3 is based on what available staff resources there are to complete these. So at the end of the day, our goal and our hope is to have a consensus on a list of priorities that align and with the strategic directions and provide the game plan or the blueprint for what we're doing over the next 2 years. Once, and hopefully we'll get to that consensus by 4 o'clock, once that has been completed today, they will be brought forward to a council meeting, and at that point we will invite the public to provide feedback on that proposed plan. Then following that public feedback, the next step after that would be for us as a council to finalize the plan. So with that groundwork, I welcome Gary Nason back. As many of you know, Gary was our interim Chief Administrative Officer for about 8 months and has a real sense of what Oak Bay is about and has a real sense of the administrative framework. I also also welcome back our staff who are here to assist with any questions or any detailed information that we may want. And I've already welcomed, but I'll re-welcome all of the audience here and the residents who've come to listen to this session. So thank you very much. Gary, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here once again, and Happy New Year to you all. Thanks, Mayor Jensen, for those opening remarks. And I just want to very briefly overview the materials that I will primarily be speaking to. Basically, I'll be following this agenda, this 7-point agenda. It's fairly tight. We have a 3-hour time period, so this is the one that I will be following and hopefully sticking to the time frames. Mayor Jensen indicated that there was a staff memorandum prepared by the CAO, which really is quite comprehensive, and it outlines the approach that we've taken in coming up with this draft strategic priorities document. I don't intend to overview that. I'm aware that you've had that for a week, but it's really the framework document which explains the approach that we've taken. What I'll be speaking primarily to, and I think that Council needs to focus on primarily, is this draft proposed recommended strategic priorities 2017-18 document. This is the fundamental difference between the session in November and this session. We're actually presenting a recommended draft set of strategic priorities for 2017 and 18, which have very much been built on the outcomes from the session in November. So this is the principal document which we will be referring to. Also, Mayor Jensen indicated that you had a one-page spreadsheet that staff have prepared. You asked for this in November. You asked that staff go away and come back with some recommended timelines, resource implications, and some indication of basically the resource and timeline implications from a staff and a financial perspective. These are basically the top 8 voted proposed new initiatives that came out of that dot voting process that we did in November. And this is what you asked for us to do in November. And I don't propose to really go through this in detail. Helen may wish to make some very quick comments, because what I want to get to is item 4 on the agenda as quickly as possible to give Council the greatest opportunity to discuss the draft proposed strategic priorities document in front of you. We've also prepared for your consideration a proposed policy or protocol for really dealing with situations where after this session's concluded and you have a new strategic priorities document, down the road there's an emergent priority or something that a member of council may wish to undertake or propose as a new project or initiative. This is a suggested or recommended policy, procedure, or protocol, whatever you want to call it, to deal with those situations. That's also an item on the agenda which we're recommending be considered. So we definitely want to get to that. There are several supplementary, I wouldn't call them late items, but they're items that have been placed before you for your information today. One is the Oak Bay Heritage Commission 2016 annual report. And of course, it's up to council whether they wish to discuss any of this and to what degree of detail, but primarily it's presented for your information at this time. There's recommendations from the Advisory Planning Commission, and these I think just came about as a result of a meeting a day or two ago. APC recommendations on a residential infill strategy. And there's also correspondence from Irene Cocaine, hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, 1595 York Place regarding proposed funding for the Heritage Conservation Area. So those are supplementary materials that are before you. Mayor Jensen indicated what the intended objectives or outcomes are today. I think he's basically articulated that pretty well. This is really part 2 of what you did in November. It builds on the outcomes from that particular session, and we've been working primarily off of what council indicated at that time were the potentially highest priority new initiatives, projects, actions, both new as well as existing. So we've been very cognizant of when we've built this new document to try to integrate as much of that as possible. So really I see the objectives today as twofold. One is to hopefully come out of here with a confirmation and an endorsement by council of the 3-page 2017 and 18 strategic priorities document. I mean, theoretically, I guess you could look at it now and say, Gary, that's it, we're done, we like it, let's go to the pub. But I'm sure it's not going to be because we have a document in front of you. But the primary objective is to go through, spend some time on that. This is council's opportunity to revise it, amend it, tweak it. But we'd like to come out of here with a document that is endorsed in principle. And I'll talk about the process. Mayor Jensen talked about the next steps in the process. I'll talk about that in just a minute. The second objective is to hopefully come out of here with an acceptance or an agreement to the proposed protocol or policy for dealing with any future new initiatives or projects that council members may wish to propose during the course of the year. And we've got a draft in front of you, and I'm prepared to speak to that a little bit later. So next steps in the process, again, Mayor Jensen pretty much covered this, is once we get through today, hopefully with an endorsement in principle of a 2017-18 strategic priorities document, we'd bring that forward to a future regular council meeting. Before doing that, advertise that meeting on the website and in the community newspaper, basically saying that council is proposing to consider adoption of the 2017 and 18 strategic priorities, inviting council to attend that, the public to attend that meeting. At the meeting, provide the public with an opportunity to comment. So there'd be a section of the agenda for public input. After receiving some public input, then council may wish to make any final, hopefully final, tweaks or revisions to the document, but basically at the meeting endorse by council motion the strategic planning document either as presented or as amended based on further input from the public that's received at that meeting. And then once that's done, presumably tidy up the document a little bit, make it more visually appealing, post it on the website, and then what I would recommend is quarterly check-ins that the CAO, probably every 3 months, just even if it's just 5 minutes, be given the opportunity to council or committee the whole meeting to give a quick update to council on the status of some of these strategic priorities. And then I would also suggest that you probably go through the same exercise that you've done this year, in December or January of next year for the final year of your mandate. Do a refresh, another relook. You may not need 2 sessions this time, but I'd recommend that as well. So any questions so far?
Council, any comments, questions on what we're trying to achieve today and the steps towards that? All right.
Nope.
No, thank you, Gary. And continue.
So I'd just like to do a brief recap of where we got to on November 4th and I guess what's in front of you now in terms of this draft new look strategic priorities document, how that very much built on what we were doing, what we did in November. If you take your mind back to that day, it was a long day. We started off by reviewing the existing document, which was, I think, 7 or 8 pages. First thing we did was we reviewed what was completed. I think the department heads and Helen overviewed items that had been completed quite briefly. And then there was a lot of inputs. I think you'll remember there was a lot of inputs to that particular session, and I was standing up at the flip charts. We had a list of council motions previous referrals during the course of the last couple of years to the strategic priorities. And I outlined all of those on the spreadsheet, on the flip chart. We had a list, staff provided a fairly extensive spreadsheet on items which we wanted, or staff wanted to propose for consideration to add to the spreadsheet because resources were already being expended on certain things. The Cenotaph, for example, and there's a few other examples. So we said, maybe this needs to be added because we're actually doing stuff, but it's not referenced in the spreadsheet. Then we went around the table, and council members were given an opportunity, each one to propose any new items. Call them what you will. Initiatives, projects, strategic priorities, anything new that's not in the plan. We put all that stuff up on various flip charts, and I even gave council an opportunity, you'll remember, to okay, it's all great to add new things, but are there some items in there that could be reprioritized or in fact even taken off the list? And I think we came up with about 5 or 6 potential reprioritizations. So we've been cognizant of that in preparing this new document. Then we went through the dot voting process. You'll remember that. I gave you each 6 dots and asked you to go by and indicate your top 6, 5 or 6, items that should be priorities for 2017 and 18. We had lunch, and we identified 8, and they're all 8 are referenced in Helen's report, and they appear in the document in some way, shape, or form that we've prepared. And then you'll recall that I stood up and I asked council to give us an indication of your top priorities for 2017 and 18. And that's where the session kind of, I won't say ground to a halt, but the day was getting long. And I think we came out of that with 10 suggested top priorities for 2017 and something like 13 for 2018. And I think it had been my intention that, depending on how the session went, okay, well, I'll put council through another dot voting, give you 3 dots, and okay, so pick 3 for 2017, pick 3 for 2018. But quite rightly, council said, and I think it was a good strategy, well, how can you ask us to do something like that when, these new items that are proposed, there's a huge variation in the size of the project. Some of them are really quite simple, don't entail a lot of resources. Others are very complex. So that's where you asked us to time out, go back, and take a look at the resource and timeline implications and come back with information on these, certainly the top 8, what staff have done. Okay. We've also taken the liberty, because council did ask for us to provide our best advice when we came back in regards to what we think is achievable to be put in. We have taken the liberty of costing out and looking at the required resources for 3 items that weren't actually in your top 8. They were on various spreadsheets: the Cenotaph residential infill and development cost charges. And you'll note in the document when we get there that those staff are actually recommending, notwithstanding they weren't in your top 8, we're recommending that they be given consideration for being included. And, council may have some questions about that, and we're prepared to talk about that. So I don't propose to get into any sort of further dot voting exercises today. When council basically, where we left off in November, you said, go away, do this work, and we'll come back with further information. In the intervening period of time, I'm aware that council's had a few discussions about several of the items. Some decisions have been made on a couple of the items. I think deer management's one. I believe there may be one or two others. Council also gave us some indication through the mayor that you wanted us to take another re-examination of the strategic directions and provide any comment on those. And in fact, we've proposed one additional new one, but also for us to be cognizant of and think about, okay, any of these new actions or even any of the pre-existing actions and initiatives, are they correctly slotted in the appropriate strategic direction? So we've been cognizant of that. So in the intervening period of time, what we've done is we've done this work in terms of resources, costing, timeline. We've re-examined the strategic directions. And essentially what we've done is we've come up with a new look version of the strategic priorities document. It's down from 7 to 3 pages. The first thing we did was we removed all of the items that had been completed that were in the previous document. They're gone. There were a number of items in there, and council picked up on it in November, that they were really core service items, right? They're not really special projects or initiatives. By and large, we've taken those out of there. You know, the more mundane, sort of like fix the streets and repair the sidewalks, they're gone. We have relooked at that document, and any special projects, initiatives, major projects that may be considered core but are really significant items for departments. We have brought those forward. You'll see those back into the 3-page document that we've provided. I'll give you an example because I come from a corporate services background. You'll see FOI and FOI regulations and records management in there. Projects that council may not necessarily be significantly involved in, but I can tell you right now, there's probably consulting resources that are going to be required and a heck of a lot of work from the department. So you'll see those back in there in the document. But gone are the core items, gone are the completed items. So that's the first thing we did. Then we took the 8 items that council voted in its voting process, came out on the top of, like, there was 28 items on all those flip charts. We took those top 8, we costed them out, timeline. You'll see that 5 of them are actually in the 2017-18 strategic priorities document. 3 of them are not. We're suggesting that they be considered as future priorities, not priorities to be undertaken in 2017-18. That doesn't mean they're off the table. They're bookmarked, they're there. But this is our recommendation. So we've got 5 of your 8 in there. We've got 3 ones that we would recommend be included. Cenotaph residential infill and development cost charges. So the new stuff's in there. And we've also attached to the document a list of what's called future priorities. And again, these are not priorities that are off the table, but at this point in time, subject to council's confirmation, they're not necessary, they're not proposed to be undertaken in 2017-18. So that's where we're at now. We also in the intervening period of time came up with this suggested protocol, but that's a separate item that we'll deal with hopefully after getting through the document. So that brings us to where we are right now. The next item on my agenda is a high-level overview of the resource and timeline requirements for the new items that you asked us to go away. I'm aware you've had this for a period of time. I don't propose to go through it line by line or to discuss it. Helen may want to make a very brief reference to it. I'd like to move on as quickly as I can to actually talking about and giving a good opportunity for council to talk about the draft document we have in front of you. But Helen, do you want to make any comments on this?
Just before you do that, I just want, I wanted to avoid panic in the streets, Gary, because you mentioned these core items are gone. But they're not, they're gone from the document, but we'll still be taking care of the roads and the sidewalks and stuff. So they're not considered the project type, so
Absolutely.
they're not on here. But they're, if I could use colloquially, there's the day-to-day operations.
Absolutely.
They will continue, right?
Absolutely.
Good. Just that if someone was listening just to that snippet, they figured, oh, now the municipality's out of the sidewalk
No.
business. Who's going to take care of them? All right. So I just wanted to clarify that. So we're now, Helen, going to talk about attachment B. Okay. Does that have a name, that attachment? Beyond that, I was thinking, and a shorter name. Okay, so this is the costing and timeline attachment?
Yeah, so I'm glad you referenced the fact that we're going to continue to do the day-to-day, because I actually was going to say that as well. And we also have some of those priorities that we've started, and so the implementation of some of the projects still are ongoing. They've just been lumped into sort of the day-to-day. I just wanted to draw your attention to one, though, because I think we don't want to lose sight of this one. And it was with regards to the residential infill. Council had requested that its advisory planning commission consider the implementation of the residential infill priorities. Is this the time that I can reference that? And so they did meet, and they met on Wednesday evening, and they came back with 3 resolutions for council's consideration in the strategic priorities. So maybe I should just read them into the public record, because I don't know that if it was an attachment, but it may be wise for me to just reference that. And so it was recommended to council to undertake regulation of secondary suites. Recommended to council to consider undertaking the development of zoning appropriate for existing legal non-conforming duplexes. And the third one, to undertake the necessary data gathering needed to consider the benchmarks listed on page 162 of the OCP. It's basically just a little table of information that they were looking for, as well as further data which captures the diversity of our neighborhoods, and that this information be used to help define and initiate a housing strategy for Oak Bay. So rather than going down the road of a complete residential infill, that this be replaced by those 3. So I just draw that to council's attention. And I think that's all. I think pretty much everything else has been covered.
Just before we move on to the next stage, we're going to come back to you, right, Gary? Is your any questions, comments at this stage from council? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Zelka, please.
Thank you very much. Just a question to the CAO regarding the APC recommendations. I wanted to ask, through the chair, of course, are these in order? I know it's listed as 1, 2, and 3. I just wanted to ask, was the recommendations to do, for example, regulation of secondary suites first, and then follow that by, Thank you.
Not necessarily. I think that the general gist of the conversation would suggest that the number 1 was the number 1 priority. It wasn't necessary, I think, in terms of 2. I think the thought was these are things that probably should be looked at. So I don't know that they actually prioritize them. From my assessment of the discussion, the number 1 seemed to be the number 1. Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Naples.
As a matter of procedure, we'll come back to this document at some point throughout the discussion, I presume, okay? Yeah, that was just to bring it to our attention.
This document referring to the APC recommendation, yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, and because, you know, along the lines of what Councillor Zelka was saying, we may need to prioritize this. I'm not sure, and I have had conversations with Helen about this. I'm not sure we are in a position necessarily today to prioritize 2 and 3. I don't think we've had that staff kind of recommendation as to capacity, costing, timelines that we may want from staff to give us some kind of ideas. If you do 1, can at the same time you do 2? Can at the same time you do 3? And if not, where is that timeline? And where is the resources needed to do that? Assuming council wants to do them, that's an assumption at this point. But so I'm not sure we can make any final decisions on that. We can have a robust discussions. We may be in a position, because the OCP directs us, in a sense, or directs council with respect to 1, but not necessarily 2 and 3. We may have that conversation today. So, but in the final analysis, it will be ours to prioritize based on recommendations from our staff. Because we want to be very clear that we don't want to create expectations in the community that we can't meet in terms of operational priorities. So we don't, we have to be realistic that there are limits to the resources available to our staff and limits to the resources that are available in our budget, for instance, to get consultants. So we have to work within that reality, and so that's something we'll come back to. So good point. Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor. Councillor Croft.
I just want to be clear here. We're talking about an overall budget of $20 million after flow-throughs, and we're talking then 10%. So we're talking about $2 million of how we're going to spend $2 million in the community. And I'm kind of curious about retaining in the document the strategic priorities, the Uplands Combined Sewer Project. Isn't that part of our core services?
Well, that's a good question. It hasn't been an ongoing core service, like, for instance, traffic calming and sidewalk letdowns and replacing sidewalks and upgrading. So it hasn't been core that way. I think going forward, once we start setting those budgets, it will be part of the everyday things that we have to get done over the next up to 30 years. So I think initially, I think it's seen as a project. Helen, can you maybe just get the staff's perspective on this?
Yeah, it's a fairly significant infrastructure project. I mean, core services is to make sure that the sewage is taken care of, to make sure that the stormwater is taken care of. That's sort of the core service. The fact that we're changing our infrastructure, I think, makes it more of a project. And it's something very specific, something that's been sort of outstanding for the better part of a couple of decades. So, and can I make one other comment, just clarification, just because we may have an X amount of money in our budget and we're talking about 10% doesn't equate to necessarily $2 million worth of budget requests.
I think that was just a rhetorical approximation. Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Croft.
Okay, and I don't know whether are we speaking about the documentation that we have in front of us yet, or
No,
are we there
Not
yet?
at this stage.
Okay,
We
thank you.
will.
I'll
Yep.
stop then.
Your Worship, I just want to, I very much agree with the CAO on this in terms of the question of Councillor Croft. Again, I always come back, because that was my background, to kind of corporate services. And you'll see, again, there's reference to significant FOI work, significant records management work. You could argue that that's really a core function, but the reason why we elected to keep significant projects like that in there, so that council is aware that they may be more core than supplemental, but there's a significant amount of staff time, resources, and money that needs to be invested in those projects. I'd put the Upland Sewer Project in the same category for engineering. That's why it's in there.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to pitch it back over to you, Gary.
Great. So if there's no further questions on this resource timeline document, I'd like to move to item number 4. We're a little bit ahead of time, which is great, because I think this is the meat of what we want to do, which is really to give council an opportunity to have a go at what staff have come up with based on a lot of input from council in November. And so without any further ado, I would suggest we get into that. You'll note that again, the document has a new look. The completed items have been removed. Not as much reference to some of the core items and tasks, although they're still very much being done. And we've carried over a number of major special projects from the previous document. So I think we're at the stage right now where we'd like to put the document before you. I don't propose to go through it line by line. I'd like to just take maybe a couple of minutes to outline, most significantly, the 8 new items that have been added. So you know where they are and why they're in there, and Helen has done a good job in terms of justifying that in her report. But basically, when council goes through the document,
Okay, just from a procedural point, you're going to come back to microphone? Okay, because when you're standing up at the flip chart without the microphone,
I know.
the viewers at home won't be able to hear you.
Right. Yeah, okay. So you have a document in front of you, which what I would propose to do is give me the opportunity to briefly summarize it, hit the high points. Then I'd like to go round the table, give each member of council an opportunity to provide any comments, suggested changes, almost little mini notices of motion if they want to change anything or tweak anything. I'll document those. I'll write them up on the spreadsheet. Make sure everyone has the opportunity to do that, and then come back and revisit each of those items. There may be many, there may be very few, I don't know. And we'll go through a process of confirmation, in or out. As council goes through the document, though, basically I'm asking the question, are you satisfied or do you concur? And do you concur with this document? And what do I mean by that? I think if you could keep in your mind, when you look at the document, are you satisfied, first of all, with the new approach to the spreadsheet? It's quite different than what we've done before. It's more concise, it's more focused, it's a lot shorter. Are you satisfied with the strategic direction? So start high. There were 7, I think, or there were 6, there's now 7. Are you satisfied with those strategic directions? Then are you satisfied with the proposed new objectives, actions, special projects? And again, those are the 8 which we have put in there for your consideration. 5 of which were in your top 8, 3 of which staff have pulled out to put in there. Are you satisfied with that? Are you satisfied with the other objectives and actions which have really been imported from the previous document? Things like FOI, the Upland Sewer Project, the things that I meant. And then finally, are you satisfied with the future priorities? That last page of the 3-page document. A lot of this stuff, in fact, I think all of it, was compiled from the various flip chart pages that I wrote up on the board in November. Are you satisfied that these are future priorities, recognizing that they may not and likely wouldn't be undertaken in 2017-18? Are you okay with that? Or do you think that 1 or 2 of these should be brought forward or reprioritized or substituted for something that's in there? So I'd just like you to keep in mind when you're going around and you're each making comments on the document, what it means by are you satisfied? Do you concur with it? Really, this is your opportunity to substitute something. No, I don't agree with this being a 2017-18 strategic priority. I'd like something brought forward that you guys are calling a future priority. You can substitute. Something comes in, something goes out. Do we have it prioritized correctly? If you say, yes, I'm okay with that being in there, but I'd like I'm not that concerned that it's done in 2017, or you're suggesting a different timeline. And then is it slotted under the correct strategic direction? So that's kind of the background about, maybe think about that as you go around the table in terms of are you happy with the document? If there's no questions, and I know I'm moving this forward quite quickly because I just want to give you guys an opportunity to really have a good discussion of the document. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I just want, if you'd bring it up before you and just have it in front of you, because I'm going to talk about really the 8 new items that are in there, just so you're comfortable with where they're at. Under strategic direction, proactively support reasoned community growth, you'll see implement the official community plan, implement residential infill priorities as directed by the APC and Council. Now, that's in there. Helen spoke to that. There's further resource, number crunching, timeline work that needs to be done on that. But just so that you know, that was not one of your top 8, okay? And it wasn't a new item that was suggested in November, but we've put it in there. The second one is adopt and implement DCCs. In fact, Council suggested in November that this was a candidate for possible reprioritization beyond your mandate. We're actually recommending, and this is in Helen's memo, that this be done, that this be a 2017-18 strategic priority. Now, this can all be changed by Council, but you asked for our best advice and our recommendation, and this is one of the 3 which we put in there. Further down, take an active role in building a safe, livable community, deer management. This was one of your 8, top 8. Turkey Head, parking lot redesign and community use. That was one of your top 8. On page 2, under develop, maintain, and protect our infrastructure, water supply redundancy, this was one of your top 8. We work closely and collaboratively with our regional neighbors, Capital Regional District, addressing derelict vessels. This was one of your top 8. Recognize and support our unique character and heritage. This is a new strategic direction which staff have proposed. And the Cenotaph Renewal, although it was raised in November, was not at the end of the day in your top 8, but we're recommending that it be included as a 2017-18 strategic priority. And Helen in her report has provided justification for that. And then establish a community-led heritage conservation area. This was in your top 8, but there was a lot of heritage stuff that was discussed in November. There were actually kind of 3 different heritage components that I was hearing. There was discussion about housing retention, heritage home preservation. There was discussion about reviewing and updating the bylaws relating to heritage properties, all of the bylaws in the district. And then there was also discussion about a heritage conservation area, a specific one-off application as well as the whole larger concept. What staff are actually suggesting here or recommending, and it is, so heritage was in your top 8, But we're recommending that the immediate priority be on the current application, the in-stream application for the heritage conservation area. We learned from that. I know from experience, we tried that in Central Saanich, didn't go very well. There was a lot of lessons to be learned on that. It's a complex process. And we're actually recommending we focus on that application, learn from that process, and then embark on some of those other things that were discussed. So those are the 8 new proposed recommended strategic initiatives. The rest of the stuff is in one way, shape, or form was in the previous document. But it's more tight and it's more focused on major special projects. So that's as far as I'm going to go with the overviewing the document. What I'd suggest now is that we do a council roundtable. We be cognizant of the time because we have a refreshment break at 2:45. Ideally, what I'd like to do is go around the table, give every member of council maybe no more than 5 minutes to, if there's anything that you're not satisfied with and you want to propose a change. Now's the time to do it. I'll stand at the spreadsheet, at the flip chart. I'll document that. We move to the net. We move around the table, have our refreshment break, and then, well, hopefully before the refreshment break, we actually go through each of those items. Is it in? Is it out? Is there a consensus? Are we going to do it? Or are we not? Is council comfortable with that?
I think that's pretty well a good plan. So essentially, council can address, let's say, the first 3, anything in the first 3 columns. First of all, the strategic directions. Do we have enough? Do we have too many? Maybe too few. Same thing with the objectives and the actions, for that matter. That although the actions drills down a little further, and sometimes just naturally follow the objectives. So I think that's a good idea. Now, whether or not we want to just start at one end and go around the other, I don't know. Do we just want to do it by hand? Go around? Okay, so do you want to start on over here with Councillor Kirby? And what we're trying to do here is to kind of be quite concrete. As Gary had mentioned, there were some things that were of our choices from November 4th that were slotted into the strategic priorities document, the 2-pager, and then there were some that were pushed to the page 3, which is, maybe we can call them the future priorities. That's the heading of the document. Were they the right way, or are there ones that we should take out of the strategic priorities, put it in futures, and elevate others? So that's kind of one of the matters, or there's something completely new. So it's fairly wide open. I don't think I'll hold anyone to 5 minutes, but we can be as focused as possible. That would be helpful.
Yeah, and I'd just ask Your Worship that if council members be as specific as possible. It's almost like, I would propose that this be changed in the document.
And we can take straw polls as we go along. This isn't the time for voting, but trying to build some kind of consensus, because we want to come out of here with a document we can take to the next step. Okay. Although I suppose to some extent, just getting back to what Helen was saying that we had from the APC, we may need some more information about that implement official community plan and exactly what the priorities under there are going to be, because we now have the recommendations in a certain order, more or less. All right. So, Councillor Kirby.
Does that count as part of your 5 minutes, the introduction there?
Yeah, I'm well over my 5 minutes, so I'm going to skip when it comes from Councillor Ney right over to Councillor Murdoch. You can be sure of that. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. So I'm going to start with expressing my surprise to see the future priorities section. If I were to choose the objectives with regard to a safe, livable community and recognizing the importance of diverse transportation options, I would not have chosen the speed limits and as the number one item. Given that we started in 2012, the Active Transportation Advisory Committee, 12 committed members of the community met sometimes twice monthly to come up with ideas, recommendations to council. At the, in the previous term, and again, we've heard from the Community Association has met on this issue. My understanding is that plans were made, consultants were hired, and we're here with all of this information, and it looks like that our complete streets policy is not and will not be implemented until late 2018 or 2019 after the next election. So that's to say 7 years of my existence on council, and we don't have a meter of new bike lane or new infrastructure to support cycling. And I know that we've done the work at the high school, but we didn't do that work. We coordinated, we collaborated, we communicated our needs to the school district, but it was not us that built it. So, to see that the wayfinding signage, the Elgin to Bowker pathway, the Henderson bike lanes 24/7 signage, Cadbury Bay bike lanes, and Bowker Creek multi-use trail improvements all pushed to the next cycle was very disappointing. And so if I were to advocate for one thing, it would be to make sure that those get back up on the list. I thought that they were kind of, when we had the old spreadsheet, which was very detailed, it appeared to me that they were in progress and that they would be built in 2017, that we had the plans in place and we were ready to go. So when we were negotiating items to be added to this list in the last go-round on November 4th, it was with the understanding on my part anyways, that those things were a done deal, that they were in progress and we didn't need to negotiate them. So that's one thing. And so if I have to take something off engineering's list in order to add those back on, I would take away the speed changes or the it is listed as speed limits. I would remove that, and I would also question the DCCs. I mean, I know we need money to build the infrastructure to make these improvements. If we want AAA cycling and pedestrian facilities, we do need funds. I get that, and I understand that that's how we get them, is through DCCs and development. I feel like that's just a deal breaker for me. I'm very disappointed.
So, to be specific, are you proposing an addition and a deletion? And so what I'm hearing is
I'm saying I'd like to see
take off DCCs as a strategic priority.
The speed limits would be the number one, and replace it with, I think the number one for me is the Cadbury Bay bike lanes, because when we started the process in the last term of looking at the high school and building the NLC, and the majority of the work from the Active Transportation Advisory Committee, and those 3 years that we worked together, that was the number one thing we wanted to see done, was to make sure that kids could get to the high school and families that were going to the new NLC and daycare safely by using a bike lane that would connect with the trails that we fought very hard to get on the site of the new high school. That was the whole goal of making sure that those were 3-meter wide multi-use trails, was that they would connect to our new bike lanes on on Cadbury Bay, and that we also would connect with what Victoria and Saanich are doing, which is building AAA, facilities that lead to Oak Bay. And as everyone knows, as soon as you cross Foul Bay on Fort, everything stops. You have no protected lane. You have no cycle lane. And we really need to make sure that the cycling and pedestrian improvements are there. If you go by the high school at any time, you'll see that every bike rack on that property, covered or uncovered, is full of bikes. And that's not just the high school students, not just their staff, but also many of the users that are going to the NLC and especially the daycare. So this is a safety issue. It's a health and safety issue. It's for our community, and I think it should be our top priority.
So is that a correct encapsulation of what you'd be proposing to do?
Absolutely.
Councillor Kirby, you mentioned two others. I didn't capture the two others. The number one is Cadbury Bay bike lanes. You would elevate from future priorities to the current priorities, if we can call it that. What was the other two?
Well, actually, there's three, but the Elgin to Bowker pathway
And that would be number two.
and the Henderson bike lane signage to change it from 7 a.m. to 7
Yep.
p.m. to 24/7.
Okay.
Just remove. All you have to do is scrape off that time, I think.
Sorry,
I don't know if you can
Cadbury
do
Bay
that.
bike lanes,
Cover
what
it
were
in
the other two?
tape.
What were the other two, sorry?
Sorry.
Henderson bike lanes, yep.
Henderson bike
Okay.
lane.
Thank you. Now, do
And
we-
the Elgin to Bowker pathway.
Do we have a portable mic, by the way? We had before, portable mic. I just, in case there's, because I heard one of the things that was said by Councillor Kirby was her understanding that some of these things were in, and I don't know if any of the staff want to make mention of this or where we're at, or, so I guess that's a non-portable there that maybe, I'm not sure who's going to maybe address that.
If I might, I think that I'm not sure that I could fully say that all of those things were in progress. I think that there's always been sort of little bits and pieces of that done. But if there was some allusion from staff in terms of that we were moving on them and that they would carry on, that wasn't really probably clearly conveyed to you during that process. But I can let Dan just sort of give you a little bit of an idea of where we are on a couple of those things. And some of those I don't think are in progress.
Thank you. And Dan Horan, our Director of Engineering, thank you.
Okay, so the update on where we are for each of these issues. Cadbury Bay bike lanes is what I'm saying now is very similar to what I would have tried to say back in November. So Cadbury Bay bike lanes, we made a little bit of progress, but generally we have some designs of what the options would look like. This is from Fort Street, Foul Bay Road up to Bowker, and what a couple of different options of what they could look like design-wise, and then rough estimate costs. So what I would need to do then is bring it back to council to say, here's what it could look like. So that's a fair amount of progress for that particular project. And that would be in preparation for estimates and then decision-making in terms of way ahead, what council would like to see there in terms of how much cost and how much timeline. So that's Cadbury Bay bike lanes. Henderson bike lanes, that was a new one that was brought up at the session. So you're correct. It's a question, technically as a project, there's not a whole lot of change that needs to be made. It's traffic control orders, which are essentially council decisions. It's more of a desirability from the, as my understanding, again, I don't have the, I wasn't here and haven't done too much research. It's my understanding that there was a decision made in the past to create that situation as it is, so that would have to be revisited, so that again, that would be a council decision about that way ahead. So there's staff effort to gather the information and provide that opportunity for the discussion to be had. The last one is Elgin to Bowker pathway. What we have is a consultant's report on the feasibility of and actions that would need to be taken to improve the pathways from the public works yard all the way around to Hampshire along the north side of Bowker Creek, with rough cost estimates of what it would be to improve that area. So again, that would be in preparation for estimates, options of what could be done there. So that's basically the status of where we are for those three areas.
Thank you. Anything else?
No.
Thank you. Councillor Zelka, please.
Thank you. I'm not quite ready yet with my questions. Okay,
Okay.
come back, please.
Councillor Ney.
Very generally, I'm very grateful, actually, for the way staff has laid this out. And in particular, what I like about this is how you've provided us with information from the community survey to help inform the choosing of these priorities, so that they were initially identified by the council here, but many of these priorities that you've included here in this 2017-2018 are also supported by a majority of our community. So I have some confidence in that. I'm going to make some comments, I can make some comments about these because I do have some questions, so for future, but I'm pleased to see the residential infill priorities included here. I'm also found the APC recommendations useful, and I hope that we can go forward and work this one. One thing that I would be saying, and this may be more detail than we need here, but given that what the APC is recommending, it seems they're encouraging us to move forward with to create bylaws and perhaps some rezoning for existing housing stock to meet the objectives as articulated in the OPC. And I would like council to consider also some conversion bylaws for our older heritage stock as well, which would be consistent with the kinds of suggestions being made by that APC. In response to Councillor Kirby's comments around the complete streets policy, I do sympathize with what you're saying. I get that. It's been frustrating. It's been a long haul. And I don't disagree that those come forward, but not this year. And this is my reason, is that we did put a lot of money and effort around the speed limit consultation. We do now have the result. And the addressing the speed limits in the community is consistent with a complete streets policy around making our streets safer, because people have been complaining that they weren't. It's possible, I'm just wondering, I don't know, as I look at this, that I hope that for the 2018 we can have something more specific. And I'm actually hoping that the DCC policy, if we do implement it, and I would support it because, again, that's supported by our community, a majority people from the community survey are supporting the DCCs, is that will generate additional revenue that could then be put over into some of these special bike lane projects, possibly, if council decided to prioritize that in the 2017 year. So I'm actually okay with it, but I also would like to see some of those projects move forward in future years. Yeah, I'm really quite okay then. I'm not going to go through the specifics because a number of the 2017-18 projects are so well supported by what our community is asking for. So just a sec, I just had one. The only, this is a detail, the DCC says 2018, but I had understood somebody to say it was 2017. It's just a small detail. I was just confused. Is it a 17 or 2018 project? Because it says 2018 here, not 2017. DCC. Anyhow, it's.
I'll just jump in.
Yeah.
It's to complete in 2018. So we would need to make progress. We would be spending quite a bit of effort this year starting, and it would carry on.
So it's kind of a
next year.
2017/2018. Okay, thank you. And thank you to staff for the report. It was very helpful.
Okay, just to summarize, I didn't see Gary get on his feet and make any, I'm going to take this off, I'm going to put that on notes. So is that a reflection of where you're at? Yep, okay. Councillor Murdoch, please.
Thank you, Chair, and yeah, first, thanks for the reports. It's actually very nice to have a first cut at this made by staff to incorporate what we talked about, because it allows us to talk to specifics and hopefully to get through this quicker. So in terms of doing it by column, strategic directions, I'm very happy. I'm very happy to see the addition of recognizing and supporting the unique character and heritage. I think that was supposed to be incorporated in everything, but it probably doesn't hurt. Some of the things didn't fall quite into that category, so it's nice to have it there. In terms of the priorities, the objectives, that the implement residential infill priorities, and looking at what the Advisory Planning Council has proposed in terms of their priorities. My take on this one is that we have a rare chance here to do a fairly high-level, overarching decision in terms of what our housing is going to look like in terms of, and I think that's a culmination of all things from secondary suites, duplexing, heritage home conversions, looking at that by region of the community and so forth. I think that, to my mind, that is the number one priority that we have. This council took on a brand new OCP at the start of its piece, and this is the one big piece that's missing. I think we really have to focus on that. So I would take out. I would leave it in there, but I would really say that we really need to, by the end of this term, have that decision, basically have agreement where and what kind of housing changes, if any, would be acceptable and incorporate into the OCP. So that to me is the highest priority, and worded slightly differently than it is right now. The development cost charges, I don't have a really good sense of this. I appreciate there's about the estimated $50,000 cost. I know of a couple of large projects that have being considered and thing that could possibly have DCCs applied to it, but in terms of its priority, in terms of getting that in place to actually reap any rewards from that, I just don't know. I see it as important, but maybe not urgent to my mind. Going down the list here, deer management and the priorities, yes, and I think that's probably going to be operationalized over time, but for right now, it's a project. I would take off the Turkey Head parking lot redesign. I appreciate, if I look at this by departments, Parks has Urban Forest and Carnarvon Park as very substantive pieces to complete this year and next. Perhaps that's the third, but if I look at the timelines, 2018, 2019, we're within 2 to 3 years of that lease expiring and having to consider the entirety use of that and wholesale sale of or lease of that property for some future use. So I'm not sure how much, aside from minor things being done to that space, would that makes a lot of sense too. Then we have the water supply redundancy, and again, if I go by departments here, our engineering department has number one there, the upland sewage separation, which is a huge project. I would suggest this would be right up there in terms of its priority and urgency, so I would definitely keep that on there. I would personally add the Cadbury Bay bike lanes into that list as well. Just, it's so far down the path, and it's a gap that I see as being you shouldn't have bike lanes that stop and start, and that just seems to me one that's relatively straightforward that should be added to the list. So I would add, in addition to the engineering piece, the Cadbury Bay Road pieces. The Capital Regional District on derelict vessels, I would move that sort of from the to-do list to a opportunistic list. If there's opportunities for us to work with other partners on that, if that comes up and that becomes a priority for the region, then we should jump on that because we're definitely impacted, but I'm not sure we should be leading that charge. Then the heritage conservation area, I personally feel that this is an opportunity for us to build a little bit more capacity for heritage in the community. It's going to be a learning process, as Mr. Nathan, you rightly pointed out. Not a simple process, but I believe that it's one that we need to take the opportunity where we are developing pieces around. We're going to make a lot of statement of significances and procedures around this that honestly the heritage currently is done by volunteers and so forth. For us to learn from a staffing perspective how to do this better and perhaps again operationalize this within staff is a tremendous opportunity. To my mind, we have to deal with the applications. We have to go through this no matter what. But it's there. But I think we have to take as much opportunity as we can if we're going to have experts in to help us to to learn from that as well. And there's a couple other pieces that were added on in terms of the Cenotaph. Again, I would probably put it as opportunistic. If there's funds available, probably do that, but other than that, it's not a high priority. Residential, those are covered. The future priorities, I would leave essentially as they are. If I make a note of what the APC mentioned, saying that we should spend some time revisiting the duplex bylaws for the legal non-conforming. Again, probably not a bad thing to do, but if we had a priority on that, I would go back to this list and look at the, I think there's more harm done right now with the RS1, RS2 uplands zoning, where we're having very, very, very large houses covering a quarter of an acre of land, in sort of in contradiction to the guidelines. That I think that if we're going to spend our time rejigging bylaws around things, I would prioritize that over the duplexes. But that's kind of a subset of that.
So I just want to make sure I capture this for future discussion. So what I was hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you would in terms of changes, that we should actually be completing the housing strategy by the end of the mandate?
Yes.
And you would be proposing to remove the turkey head?
Yeah, I mean, the list is, I would suggest that, well, don't remove turkey head. That
No,
would
no,
be-
no,
that would be
no, but as
problematic.
a strategic priority.
Well, yeah, and again, I think it is at least lowered in priority. So I guess if Parks has completed the Carnarvon Park and the urban forest, then that would be, and my concern there is, yeah, primarily because of the fact that we're going to go through a very significant leasing review and refresh there in 2022.
So complete the housing strategy. Turkey Head would be a lower priority, but what would you be proposing to bring forward as a strategic priority?
So nothing else necessarily replacing Turkey Head. Again, that's up to Parks. If they have time for it, they can keep it on there. I'm just saying that should be moved down to the bottom
Yeah.
of the Parks.
But you mentioned a couple things in engineering, right?
Oh, the Cadbury Bay bike lanes. Yes, thank you. And I sort of demoted the derelict vessels to more of an opportunistic, as well as the Cenotaph being demoted more to an opportunistic position, where if we have funding available for both, or regional support for the derelict vessels, and funding opportunities for Cenotaph, then I would sort of bump them back up the priorities piece. And I sort of suggested that we flesh out the heritage conservation area to be a bit more, I guess, I'm not sure what the right word is here. Wholesome. Yes, more wholesome. No, just so we expand it, so we have an opportunity to sort of improve our internal processes at the same time.
So is this an accurate reflection? Complete the housing strategy, add the Cadbury Bay bike lanes, and Cenotaph and derelict vessels, only subject to sufficient funding.
Or partnerships for derelict vessels.
Remove them as a strategic priority or a high priority, and same thing with Turkey Head.
Yes.
Lower priority.
I think that the development cost charges, I would just maybe need a bit more information in terms of what that would. I'm taking it from staff's recommendation. They feel that's timely and important, so I'll leave it there. I'm not sure I thoroughly understand where that's going to fit in terms of urgency. Thank you.
So a couple of things, just for clarity. So the housing strategy, that was listed in with the secondary suites regulations. So is the suggestion that we do a housing strategy first and then move to the secondary suites?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And the derelict vessels, the plan at this stage anyway for staff was to in fact only do that if the CRD is leading. So at this stage, it wouldn't, if the CRD is not leading this, we don't anticipate leading it.
Yeah, that was that's ideal from my
So, and
perspective.
just prior to Christmas, there was some discussion at the CRD that they were going to take that on. And so that's sort of what prompted it on that. And in terms of the Cenotaph, subject only to funding, I think that you might want to realize that we need to have a project ready before you can do subject to funding. So a lot of our opportunities for funding require us to have a shelf ready. And I think we're very close with the work that committee has done. It just hasn't been completed at this point. So just as a clarification on that. And in terms of the DCCs and where we're, for further questions or clarification for you, I'm happy to have Dan provide that.
So just to follow up on the DCCs as a project, I think the end hope is a bylaw that allows us to the full policy in place. But before we should put the effort and the time into going down that route. We're not quite at the place yet after the brief that you all had back in May to know whether it's worth the while. So the first phase, the first step is to engage, is to spend some time and effort in the initial activity, which is to develop the growth projections for the community and identify the development that would be related to the infrastructure work that would be related to that growth. Right now, we don't have a good feel for what that is. So knowing that answer helps us get a better insight whether there's a benefit to go ahead and do the DCCs. There's a tremendous opportunity to potentially in the future to fund future infrastructure growth, but we're kind of at the too early in the stage to know. So that's what we're recommending, at least the first phase, to spend some effort on that, to gather that information so that you can make a decision, council, whether we need to carry on further.
If I may. Well, I guess I would say on that front that, I mean, our growth projections right now are nominal, believing the same they've been in the OCP for 25 years or so, and I think it's 0.5%, I think, per year per growth. But that's been on paper, but we haven't achieved anywhere close to that, and largely because we haven't had any housing for people to move into. So really, until we've decided what and if any changes we make to the housing and have a plan for that and know where that would go and so forth, it's kind of, it seems to me that, again, that we're bump up the urgency on the housing strategy so we can kind of agree as a community where we and how much we want to build, and that would probably inform that significantly. I looked at the $50,000 number. If that's to develop growth models and so forth, I'd be very concerned that there's a theory and then there's reality, and if we're not going to agree as a community to build significantly, then I don't see the particular value in spending that money at this point. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Croft, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm on board with the secondary suite duplexes and conversion as mentioned by Councillor Ney. I think that the heritage conversion is a great opportunity that can be added to the heritage conservation area. I think those are things that we should be looking at the same time. That is affecting our quality of housing, gives us an opportunity to densify within existing structures. I don't agree that we need an overall arching housing strategy. I think we could spend a lot of time talking about the houses that we have. We've got a great housing stock, and what that turns into will be what the community decides that it'll turn into over time. The DCCs, I remember the report that was done in May. I'm not certain that a DCC is going to give us the kind of money that we would like to have to fund our greenways. I think that we need a greenway strategy that would go along like other communities have, that is a donation to fund directly our greenways that we want to see, both bike lanes and walking paths. I would agree on the Turkey Head parking lot that I don't think that that's a priority. I think that the long-range plan for the marina lands is more important. We need to be beginning to address what's going to take place in 5 years when that lease comes up, and we need to be talking about that in the community. I would like to see the speed limit things actually change to complete streets. I support Councillor Kirby in that. Our community survey indicated that 63% of the people wanted better walking paths and 62% wanted better bike lanes. So I really support that as the as the thing is complete streets with maybe whatever you want to put under the actions, and maybe there's two actions in there, the speed limit design and the Cadbury completion. The Capital Regional District working with the CRD, that's going to happen. They're going to take it over. Mr. Jones came forward with a recommendation earlier that we look at pursuing a water lease over 2 sections of property, and I would rather talk about that than derelict boats and things, because the provincial government is very reluctant to do water leases. They have been trying to get rid of them, but if we can secure that for the future, I think that would be a great thing to do. It may take us up to 2 years to do that, and during that time, we can have a conversation about what might happen with that space if we ever get it. But I supported that recommendation by Mr. Jones. Conservation area, Cenotaph Renewal, I think that the Cenotaph Renewal is important as a heritage site, and it's one of those things that we can do, and I agree as funding becomes available, but we need a plan. And what we seem to lack often in our community is the plan in place that we can apply for funding when funding opportunities become available. So without a plan, we don't have an opportunity to get money. Overall, I like the new presentation. There's a lot on the opportunities list that I know a lot of people in the community would like to see as things being done, but not as opportunities, but it's resource driven. Thank you.
So, Councillor Croft, in terms of are there any specific items that you would like to put forward for removal, or any specific items you want to propose to be added? Because that's, for clarity, that's, I know that staff will require that degree of clarity.
Okay.
In other words, if you put something, bring it, for example, from future priorities into 2017-18, that means we're likely going to be doing it. Whereas if you take something out of 2017-18 and put it into future priorities, probably we won't.
Okay, so I apologize for not being clear. I think we should have greenways included in a DCC review. I think that's something that other communities are using is an opportunity, is greenways rather than calling them DCCs. There's greenway offsets. The City of Victoria uses those. I support the removal of the turkey head. I said these things. You can take the whole turkey's head with them, too. Or no, take the parking lot away and let's have a turkey's head back. I support Councillor Kirby in, I don't want to have this title of objectives. I think the complete streets should stay on there as an objective. And we have two actions. One is the speed limit, and the other one is the Cadbury completion. But it sounds like that's underway in a way, so you can just add it to your first section there. And the other thing that I suggested was that I would like to see consideration of a conversion bylaw along with the recommendation that's been made by the APC. Heritage conversions. Yeah. Well, no, secondary suites, duplexes, and heritage conversions. They're all included.
So just on that, I think just for clarification, I think that the APC, and I can't really speak for them, I don't know that they were excluding conversions. I think that part of it, they were looking at a step process in terms of what could be done sort of between 2017 to 2018. So I just don't want council to think that that wasn't considered. I think that they were just really trying to look at what resources and staff resource we had to do that. So just in terms of, I just didn't want council to think that that wasn't being considered.
I didn't mean to imply that.
Thank you.
I think there's a couple of questions from staff on a few of the items that Councillor Croft has proposed.
So the first point I wanted just to make is to say that when we talk about Cadbury Bay bike lanes, there's a significant amount of staff effort that we anticipate that's still required to bring the project forward. So all I'm saying is that I think if we're gonna, if council decides to bring it onto the list of priorities that's gonna be done, it needs to be offset with something. So to say complete streets, and then that means speed limits and Cadbro Bay bike lanes, it just represents growth in terms of the what's being asked from engineering services and all the supporting departments. So that's just the point I wanted to make there. The second one was we just put our heads together to make sure that, you know, because I didn't know what it was, the greenways thing, and so we just wanted to make sure that it wasn't just me that didn't know, so we just were seeking clarification on more what that means, so that we can kind of better understand what we would need to deliver there.
I think if you check the City of Victoria's bylaws that they're using for redevelopment sites, that the way that they're using them is by way of bonus density. But I don't think that has to be the way that they are used for greenways. But maybe planning has more knowledge of this than I do. But there is you know, rather than DCCs, which I think could be very small amounts of money in our community because it's for larger developments, and you know, what is the amount that's usually charged? $7,500, $10,000 per unit. But I know that they're using greenways, so if people are asking for variances on developments or what have you, there might be a opportunity to obtain additional money for the community to provide greenways around those projects or in other parts of the community. Because I know that money in the City of Victoria is being used for their greenways and their, you know, the bikeways they're doing on Pandora. They're funding that through their greenways projects.
Could I just ask on that point? We already have a policy of requiring amenities payments where there is an upzoning, as an example, right? Is this just a kind of a variant where you build in another definition of what those amenities are, i.e. greenways? Is that as simple as that, or am I oversimplifying?
No, I think it's that's one way of describing it.
Because we may already have that in place, just under a different name. Does any staff want to assume the microphone position?
Just on that very point, I think that's what we're talking about, is a lot of this requires a lot more research and clarification, so we might not be able to answer all those specifically.
And it is a detail that we're drilling down in, but if we're going to start tweaking here, we do need to know what we're talking about a little bit.
And
Deborah Jensen.
just to clarify some of those pieces, so Mayor Jensen, you're correct. We do have a series of items that are laid out through community amenity contributions, such as trails, protection of heritage features, and so on. Those we can look at obtaining when someone is looking at either a rezoning proposal or an OCP amendment. So it's very specific as to when council can consider those amenity contributions. As far as greenways, some of that ties back into a DCC program, and Dan can speak to that much more than I can. There are very specific things that we can request as part of a DCC program. So we'd have to look at the specifics of that in terms of what that actually means for Oak Bay.
Right, so it would require more workup and more thought. Which would be part of that DCC if we left it on. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add just one more comment to what Deborah's saying, and to answer a question from Councillor Murdoch earlier. So the DCCs, in the end, as the policies put together, it's meant to as development occurs, to obtain funding for projects such as roads, cycling infrastructure, sewage collection, drainage, water distribution, but also parks acquisition and parks development. So that's what a DCC policy would be for. The other part was just Councillor Murdoch, the 50,000 that's in the spreadsheet talking about in terms of the funding. That's for the whole phase of terms of development. We just put our heads together, and Roy and I, the first phase, that initial part is about 5,000 to 10,000 of that budget. So that's what we'd be looking for the beginning parts of that.
Thank you.
If I can just further on that DCC, that first phase, primarily the DCCs are based on our growth in our OCP. So it's based on the OCP and it's based on engineering infrastructure. So we have to put those items together with the consultant and work out what our DCC bylaw would look like and how much funds that we would actually be able to obtain. That's the stage when we can decide whether we go for the full bylaw or we decide, no, it's not worth it for the municipality.
That's great.
And as I recall from that, I guess that's probably one of the reasons for my concerns, is that the way that those DCCs are worked out is it is based on that growth projection. But if the overall growth projection is, say, half of 1%, which is 5,000 units or something like that, just say 100 units as a round number, and so one person wants to build an extra unit, they should have paid 1% of that piece. So it's tied to that total overall number as that assessment. Their impact would be that percentage. So if our actual growth is quite a bit smaller than the projected, then the relative attachment to that is less. So I think the more accurate that number, I guess, it boils down to, though, the better it is for DCCs, because it will more accurately reflect the cost in the community.
Yes, and that 0.5%, I mean, if our housing infill development strategies and policies, decide that, well, maybe that number is going to change, the DCC bylaw would change accordingly. We would update our DCC bylaw if there was a change to that 0.5%.
Okay, thank you very much, Roy. So, Councillor Braithwaite and Councillor Zelka, between you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. It's a good
for
thing.
us to stay on schedule.
It's a good, and I would hate to stand in the way of anybody in their coffee break, so I will keep my comments very succinct. I'd like to first thank staff for the great report. I think one of the most important things in your report is pointing out that approximately 90% of the corporation's resources are dedicated to providing important day-to-day services, so that really only leaves 10% left over for what we're talking about right now. I have a couple of things that I would like to comment on. To take off the future list, I'm going to get right to it, Gary. To take off the future list and add on to the current list, I would really like to see the revision of the RS1, RS2 bylaw regulations for uplands added to our list. I think that's one of the most important things that's come up in the last couple of years around the council table, is the sizing and massing of houses within the uplands. So I think it's a very important thing to move forward. I would keep on the Turkey Head parking lot, and here's my reasoning for that. I think that when we're looking at that whole area where the HCA is proposed to be and the Glen Lyon Norfolk redevelopment of that school, I think adding the Turkey Head area in there as a redevelopment at that time might be a good thing. So I would actually keep the Turkey Head on, and I would put the Carnarvon Park plan a little bit further down the list. I would agree with Councillor Ney on the speed limits, to keep that on. I think that your reasoning for that was sound, and it does, to me, constitute part of our complete streets, so I think it's important to do that. The other things that I would agree with that's been discussed already is it was good to get the clarification on the derelict boats. I appreciate that. And or the derelict vessels, sorry. And I would also agree that the overarching housing strategy is something that's very, very important. So if that did get moved up, if that was the wish of everyone around the table, I would be fine with that too. So I'm adding on the revision. I appreciate the fact that in your report you've said that some of the things that are on our future priorities list, if funding became available, for example, with the installation of additional electric vehicle charging stations, if funding came available, it would be something that staff could look at. It's good to have that capacity, I think. And the heritage conservation area, I think, is very important and would keep that on the list for sure. I agree with Councillor Murdoch saying about building more capacity for heritage within our community. And I'm going to stop so that Councillor Zelka has a chance.
Yeah, and just to be clear, when I put the words remove up there, if that is ultimately what you decide to do, that doesn't mean it just disappears. It essentially is shifted to other priorities, right?
It's moved down
Yeah.
the list, right?
Yeah, exactly. Taken out of 2017-18.
Councillor Zalka, Councillor Braithwaite's left you 2 minutes, approximately. We're flexible. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I've been accused of speaking too quickly, so I'll do my best to slow down so that people can at least understand a few words. I echo thanks to staff and to Gary for organizing this, and thank you for the interest also from the public in this very important process. Fabulous new approach, and I really like the new report. I'm hearing some great ideas from colleagues, and I want to echo many of them. Focusing on trying to just realize that we're a small district. We have to be sustainable, have a small tax base, and lots of great ideas, and how we're going to pay for it. The DCCs, I understand, is trying to raise some money, but our growth rates are incredibly small. So my worry is that we might spend too much money, too much energy on too much of our treasure on something that won't actually fund some new initiatives, since really a DCC can only fund what's associated with that new growth. I understand there's some restrictions there. So I'm very interested in hearing more about the greenways funding. I'm very interested in hearing more about how we can extend our community amenities as a way of finding that new resourcing. I don't want to add anything new to this, but with respect to the development cost charges, I would hope that would include other sources of funding, such as community amenities and, say, this greenway funding. So I would expand that to look at really the concept of funding versus just DCCs. I'm wish to support continuing and finishing the asset management plan, because I see that as a precursor to our grant-ready projects. Without that asset management in place, we really can't jump on those opportunities. So I definitely would like to see that move forward to allow us the flexibility of jumping on the grant opportunities as they come forward. So I'm pleased to see that that's there. And as a result of that, I would move the Cenotaph and the Turkey Head project to a lower priority until and unless the asset management plan provides grant opportunistic opportunities, if you know what I mean.
Sorry, which two? Cenotaph and
Cenotaph
here's the other
and
one?
community, Cenotaph and Turkey Head.
Turkey Head, okay, thank you.
I would move those down.
But not off.
No, gosh, no, not off. Just to a slightly lower priorities to make them more opportunistic. And I would move up the Oak Bay Village plan, in particular relating to tying in with asset management, tying in with the heritage, the Henderson and the Monterey properties, and tying in with, the Hampshire, thank you, the Hampshire and Monterey properties. And I imagine we are doing something with those properties, but I do see that, it would be great to see that tied in with a larger plan if possible. Could I ask staff a question at this moment as to what may be in process with respect to Hampshire?
Yep. There's a reference to it in the report coming forward with some ideas early this year. But just before staff is gathering their thoughts on that as an issue, you started by saying you're not adding anything.
No.
But then I hear you saying...
No. I was referring to the DCCs and I didn't want to add a new initiative related to community amenities. No, I was talking about DCCs.
Oh, okay, so not... And so you're proposing to add the Oak Bay Village from the future priorities onto the current priorities?
If those other two were taken off, yes.
Others meaning, so off would be Cenotaph and Turkey Head?
As written by Gary Nason.
Okay, and on would be the village, okay? Now, staff, on the issue of coming forward with a report on the properties we own, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, we would expect to come forward within the next 2 months with a report to council. We've been gathering information on the properties, and we would expect to bring that forward within the next couple of months.
Thank you.
Okay. And if I may finish?
Yep.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very much in support of the APC recommendations. I'm very pleased to see that they're, with the process as laid out in the recommendations on January 12th. As for item number 1 related to the secondary suites, of course, as per the OCP survey, they said the OPC survey basically supports it as long as it assumes key issues such as tree protection, parking, traffic, noise, and neighborhood character will be addressed. That was what the survey question said before it says, do you support secondary suites? So as long as that's all a package deal, I support this. With respect to number 2, I concur with council colleagues tying that, adding in, or the understanding that this would include heritage conversions as a way of moving forward heritage aspects. I think the whole zoning aspect about non-conforming duplexes, as long as it supports conversions and moving forward with that, that would make a lot of sense. And number 3, on the third initiative about the benchmarks, I'm very pleased to see analytics, measures of success, key performance indicators being raised as a way that we can help the public understand how well we're doing. And I would hope that these would appear in our annual plan, those benchmarks, as mentioned in number 3 of the APC recommendations.
Thank you.
The final thing, if I may, under established community-led heritage conservation area, I would hope, and I concur with Councillor Murdoch, that if this could be extended or could include not just laying the groundwork, but if there's an opportunity to ensure that our policies and our bylaws are fully in alignment with provincial legislation and best practices, then I would definitely like to see that possibly being expanded and more holistic, essentially, is what I'm referring to. Thank you.
All right, that was a quick wrap-up. Thank you very much for that. We're only running about 5 or less minutes late, so I'm going to propose that we take a break now, and then we come back. And I think what we need to do, because we're not at the point yet where we've developed that consensus with what's in and what's out, we may want to start going. We'll go back and then we'll build that. Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break.
Yep, that's fine. Can I get an indication in terms of the final item on the agenda after this, which is the policy and protocol, just to get a sense of how much time we can spend going through, because I think that we need to have further discussion and I need clearer direction in regards to in-out, what's coming off, what's being added. Is council generally comfortable with that protocol and policy for dealing with future emergent items? Do you think there's going to be a lot of discussion that's going to be needed on that?
And I hear some no's and nodding of head in agreement that seems the direction we want to go. And no, there's not going to be discord. But in any event, if we don't get to it today, it's not as critical as confirming the list. We can always perhaps look at the protocol at another time, because it is a bit of a standalone in terms of trying to get the table of council priorities settled. But it doesn't seem like we'll need a lot of time for that protocol.
Okay, that's good to know.
Thank you. 10 minutes. Shall we say that? We'll convene at 3 o'clock, or reconvene. So, Gary, how are you proposing to do the next step? We're going to work with you. Okay.
Well, other journeys. Yeah. Well, I dropped a couple, but you know, maybe 3.
I hate
Please.
that. I hate that.
That's fine.
Makes me feel stupid.
You think you're on top of stuff, right?
So the
Yeah.
city of Victoria does.
Yeah, Tara. When you sent it to me, I realized after that you should get hard copies. Well, waiting through the blah, 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 and I realized I didn't grab it. I've been away and then I interviews all day Monday and it's gonna give me a couple days to get it.
I totally get it. Just,
Can I do it right now?
if you, there's a moment, so as I am cheeky, I seized it. Good. I try.
I don't know. I'm not touching it.
Hold on a big cookie. They were in Cadbury, because Dennis and Brenda are sometimes 2 or 3 weeks for 2 or 4 months they come back. So
No, you know what?
Sometimes
they do things differently.
I know. Thank you. Oh my goodness, thank you. I didn't even thank you.
No. But Deb said that you guys have appreciated you guys.
Yes. You're amazing. You make it even better.
I was the one who asked for the favor.
I also make chocolates too. I had
The hope's out there.
actually
All right.
Yours was hard. I thought mine was hard.
No worries.
It was you know, like we weighed in, because we took them right before. We weighed in on, so that it was the 400 points. So we went and weighed in first, then we went, so it was a Saturday. So it was 1 week of Christmas.
Oh my God, nothing.
Yeah, but still, it was like thick. And then, when I got home, I weighed myself. I was like,
No way.
seriously. Well, you know, I mean, I just felt like I did myself, but still. But even today, I knew it was low. I bet you know what? It's like, it is what it is. I still don't know
No what?
Knitting. No knitting.
I almost, I said to Mike, I'm gonna bring my knitting, and then I thought, no, I'm at the heel on the sock, I have to really think. So I didn't bring it, but I almost did.
That is fun.
Oh, I think about that, I have all these knitting people I follow.
This
but I
would be a
never
good
really
time to
think
start
about it.
moving
I
in.
really should, since I'm the Oak Bay knitter, but I'm more focused on heritage, right? Or Paul.
Wouldn't it?
How's Mike? How is Mike?
He's way back.
I think it can.
Did you just wonder how?
Although I guess we can't start.
2 days, remember when we did the presentation on Ireland? 2 days.
I guess when the boss is
Okay. So it seemed pretty flexible.
Yeah. I think we can't really get going until Helen and
You know, I said, he's a very
I guess that doesn't go.
I think you should trade him in for a new model.
No, you know, yeah, no, he's back to doing everything, and it's great, but he's even the prep, everybody. Give me a break with the real.
Can you? Keep waiting. I got rid of husband around. Is it rid of husband?
You ever complain?
After that, I'd never seen that. So that's when I ran to go. And when they come out, and I said, my daughter to be here? And they thought, he was talking about, oh my goodness. Little nation.
You're always in danger of slipping into actor. I honestly, God, I think all the things we have done, because it's, we have,
I tried to find it on, is it on your thing? I think I bought the
originally this came out years ago. I don't understand. I don't.
and roll.
Not yet, we must be on. We've been on.
Okay, let's go.
All right, I am going to ask that people take their seats. All right, I'm going to ask people to take their seats. We're going to reconvene. Thank you. Thank you. There you go. All righty. So a lot of good discussion. We're back in session now. A lot of good discussion. What we have got to do now is kind of reach some kind of consensus. And I think we need to understand before we do that, if we decide as a group we're going to remove something, what are the consequences? What does that mean? Number two, we're also going to have to get some kind of understanding of what we do if we add something back in. One of the disadvantages we have at this point of adding something back in is we may not have sufficient information before us to make decisions on that today. So I'll give you a for instance. If it is the council's wish to take off speed limits and substitute it with bike lanes, we don't have information as to whether or not those are equivalent amounts of cost and work. So we may require more information if we're adding something in the context of removing something else. So we need to keep that in mind at this point. So let's ask staff to begin with, and Gary, I know you had a meeting with Helen just in the break in terms of if we were to take something off the current list, what does that mean?
Well, Your Worship, basically when I use the terminology remove, okay, and I think the best way to approach this is for me to go back through these 2 pages and get absolute clarification and throw the question back to council. Okay, what I'm hearing is that there may be close to a consensus or support to remove or add something. If at the end of the day there's a consensus to remove something, what that means to me is it has taken off the first 2 pages. It's no longer a 2017-18 strategic priority. It doesn't disappear. It goes to page 3, which is another priority, but it means that we would down tools on whatever we're doing in 2017-18. Okay, it would go to another priority. That's the implication for that. So what I would suggest we do, if it's okay with you, is let me go back and indicate, okay, I'm hearing that and let's start with speed limits. I heard a number of you say that we shouldn't focus on that. So let me ask the question, is there a consensus or a majority opinion that we should remove speed limits, any further work on that, from page 2 of the, it's a page 2 objective for 2017-18. And then I'd like to do that exercise on the removals and the additions and see where we're at. I'm also going to need some clarification on the DCC project, for example. I'm hearing that there may be a consensus well, I don't say a consensus, there may be support to keep doing it, but the scope, I'm hearing that there may be some scope issues. Add this or don't look at this, okay? So can we start with remove? I'm hearing there's a support potentially to remove speed limits. Nope, keep it in. Okay. Let's do the removals. Turkey head. I heard that came up a number of times. Is there
Just go, Gary, I think we want to go back to the remove speed
Want to go back?
limits. We're not here to re-argue the...
No, I know that. I'm just saying that if it came down to one or the other, like if we have to take one out of the engineering group.
Right.
And in order to have something added back in, such as Cadbury bike lanes, which a number of people have mentioned, I think it means we have to take something out, right? That's why I suggested it. I don't want to see them gone. I think that, the work that's been done may have been helpful and that's a good project, but I don't want to see it gone, but if it means we have to take one out in order to add another, then I am absolutely in favor of removing the speed limit.
I'm going to come back to the additions, and I'm hearing that Cadbury bike lanes was a potential addition. I'll come back to that, ask the same question. But in that particular case, if there's majority support for adding it, that final decision can't be made at this meeting, because essentially Helen and the staff would have to go back and do the same little exercise that they did for the top 8 and cost it out, and what would be the implications for that. But I think we've got to move forward, so at least give us an indication now is, yes, we'd like this added. Tell us what that's going to entail.
Okay. I think there's a number of people who want to speak to now. We're just speaking to the issue of speed limits.
I actually had a question about clarification of the process. So if we're taking away something, does it have to be from the same category? Does it have to be an engineering service thing? So we've talked about Turkey Head. We take Turkey Head off of Parks and Rec, and we add in Cadbury Bay bike lanes. Well, that doesn't seem fair that we're taking something away from Parks and Rec culture, but we're adding it to engineering, right?
Helen?
No, and you're absolutely right, because from a staff perspective, that's going to be difficult, because quite honestly, you look at that list and you have 3 departments that you're focusing on, really 2, is the building and planning and in the engineering. So, but if those are important issues that the council wants to see accomplished, I can't give you a one-off for each one of these until I see it in its entirety, right? So I think you got to go through the exercise first about, is this the priority of something that you want to see done between 2017 and 2018? If we have to go through an exercise later of going, this is number 1, this is number 2, it's kind of like when you're going through what the Advisory Planning Commission gave you. So you have now, I hear, housing strategy as being number 1. Maybe that's sort of the focus you need to be looking at and saying, if you get to 1 and then number 2 and then number 3, if that's helpful.
So what I'm hearing for iteration number 2 of this document, for the purposes of bringing back a revised document, speed limits is staying in at this point in time. So in terms of another removal, I was hearing Turkey Head.
Go ahead, Eric. Eric's got something.
Thank you, Chair. The reason I support speed limits staying in is because I heard Director of Engineering say that some process has already moved forward on some aspects of the Cadbury Bay bike lane, in particular in the area around the schools. Now, I just happened to be on the Opus International's website the other day, and they are advertising how they've done all this work for Oak Bay on bike lanes around the area of Oak Bay High School. Yay, I haven't seen it yet, but apparently some work has been done. And it's sort of in the public, not really. So that gives me hope that we'll be seeing some information around Cadbury Bay bike lanes in the area of Oak Bay High School. Hence, I support speed limits continuing.
Okay, so, and I think Councillor Croft may have had a, okay. So
Turkey Head.
Moving on. Yeah.
Turkey Head. Now again, if there's a consensus or a majority that it be removed, what that would mean is that it doesn't disappear, it just goes to page 3, future priority.
I didn't speak to this, the list, but I'm going to say something about Turkey Head. I was very much in favor of putting it on initially. And it came on kind of a little bit through the back door. It wasn't really generated by the Parks and Recreation Commission. My sense now, though, is, again, listening to Councillor Murdoch, I think it is important, but not in the next 2 years. I think where it becomes important is the next council's review of what's going to happen in that whole area in the context of a new lease, which is 2022, I believe. Probably you need to start looking at that maybe 3 or 4 years ahead. So I think we're a little bit ahead of that curve. I think it's important, no question about it, but it's important in a bigger context. So I would see we should remove that at this juncture.
Actually, looking at this, it already says that we wouldn't be looking at Turkey Head until 2018, 2019, and I think it's important to leave it on there for that time period, because we've talked for so many years that I've been on council about doing something with that area, and it's more like looking at the bylaws around there, not necessarily doing something physically with it, but looking at the bylaws for what activities can take place on Turkey Head would be the number one, I think.
Okay, but I think it's not on there for that, this isn't on there for that purpose, right? Because if you look at what it says, it's park, recreation, and culture. If you're now refocusing, and I don't disagree that we should look at that, that would be a corporate services issue, right? Changing the use of that, parking lot.
So which speaks to, I think, making sure that we're really clear about
Okay.
what is it that we see as completion. Maybe that's a way to look at it. What would you see as completion? So if it's bylaw changes, I think we need to be
Right.
very specific and clear about that.
Okay, so I think, again, maybe, now listening to Councillor Braithwaite, we may want to think about converting that from thinking of it as a park, developing and redesigning Turkey Head, no, but perhaps looking at the bylaws and to bring them into compliance with what we have at other parking areas. Again, that's something we could redefine what Turkey Head's on there for, and then ask staff, in particular Warren, to bring back an idea of the cost and that kind of thing. So that's just a thought there. In other words,
So it stays on, but we're asked to relook at the scope of what it means and
yeah,
come
not
back.
as a park scope, but as a current use scope. And I think that's going to be very different in terms of the amount of work. Yep. Eric, go ahead. Or Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify what this task is. If it becomes an asset, then like an asset, I guess, means a building. If we're building a stage, I don't know what this is yet. Community use options, does that mean it'll fall under asset management? So in terms of the larger purview of asset management planning, I don't know. Yes.
My thought would be that it would just be looking at changing the bylaws around the usage of Turkey Head. So, for example, right now you are not allowed to have any sort of activity on Turkey Head. So if the marina or if Parks and Rec wanted to put an art show at Turkey Head, you could not do that because of the way the bylaws are written. So all I'm asking is that we have a look at the bylaws and have them written in such a way that we can hold activities on Turkey Head. I'm not asking for any redevelopment of Turkey Head whatsoever at this time.
So it stays on, subject to that sort of clarification and further advice from staff if we think we need to come back in terms of scope, but it stays on.
Seems like that.
Okay.
There's no objections there. Yes, thanks, Gary.
Okay. Cenotaph and derelict vessels. I was hearing that leave it on, council's soft on it, but leave it on, but subject to sufficient external sources of funding being available.
In other words, getting it shovel ready, or grant ready, if we will.
Okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay.
It may be of value for the council to hear that the Cenotaph project, as you all know, has been moving forward with a Cenotaph committee. And to date, they have now produced a design. They had a charrette. There's a design plan. There is a budget for the hardscaping. There is a budget for the Cenotaph restoration. And in essence, the project is now shovel ready to take advantage of matching funds from Veterans Affairs. And I understand there's also some bicentennial monies that may address the restoration of the Cenotaph. So that, pardon me? Sorry. So for your information, that project now is shovel ready.
Okay. If shovel ready often has a component of council approval in it. So I think that is, and it's probably a small step given the amount of work that has been done. We've talked about it in principle, but I'm not sure we've seen all the numbers and the plans. But I think that's just a small step.
It's pre-council shovel.
Pre-council shovel ready. All right. Yeah, I think that.
Okay.
I don't know if that word would be permitted in Scrabble. Yeah.
I think I get the sense. We're comfortable. Another removal potential that I was hearing, Carnarvon Park Plan. One member of council was pretty clear about this being a potential item to reprioritize from 17-18 to a future priority.
Okay. I didn't speak to, again, first round, so I'm going to make mention that this has been something we've been looking at for some time. And I think there is an expectation that from our community, and it is an important asset that we have. So I certainly wouldn't favor removing it at this point. And we've essentially removed the the Turkey Head parking lot redesign community use by converting it into a bylaw issue. So we would certainly have enough capacity here. We've earmarked some monies in prior years for this. I think 50,000 for consultants' reports. We're well on the way to doing this, and we'd actually gone through this exercise prior to the Oak Bay High School. So we had quite a plan for redesigning and revisioning it. We essentially took the plan that we had for Carnarvon Park and moved it into the high school neighborhood learning center. So I think now we have to go back and replace that. So I certainly would support keeping it. So
actually, it was me that put that on there, and because we've done the rejig with Turkey Head, I would be very happy to take it off. I would actually sat on that original committee for Carnarvon Park, so I'm happy to leave it on.
Okay. So I don't think there's a consensus to remove it at this point. Thank you.
Okay, the potential additions. And what additions mean is if there's a consensus or a majority to move this up into 2017-18. In some cases, we may ask for the opportunity to come back with the same exercise that we did for the top 8 in terms of giving you further advice in regards to resource and timeline implications. I was hearing from several sources adding Cadbury Bay Bike Lane project.
I would certainly favor that. Again, I think ever since the school started, the design started, I think there's been an expectation that there will be improvements there, and not necessarily when the school is being built, but certainly as the school was finished, and it's now well finished and well on its way. And I think Councillor Kirby's point that there was an expectation that the on-site bike ways would be connected to the on-street bikeways. So I would certainly support adding that. And if we had to, I would give it a higher priority level than the speed limits in the next 2 years. Thank you. Councillor Croft.
Thank you. I actually see that the speed limits in the bike lanes is related, because if we don't do a phased approach to the speed limits and look at that intersection and develop a plan of what the speed limits are going to look like going down Cadbury Bay, because they change very often, and that may be part of the phased development that begins with that Cadbury Bay and includes the bike lanes in it. I see them actually very much related, a lot of the bikeways and pathways that we're talking about with speed limits.
Okay. Councillor Braithwaite.
I just want a clarification from staff, if I might. Did we not hear Mr. Horan say that he was going to be coming to estimates with a pricing for Cadbury Bay bike lanes? Would lead me to believe that that was already on?
If it's not on the list, if we keep it off the list, the answer to that would be no. So it's the down tools thing on anything on the futures list.
But it's on the futures list already, and I'm not saying it shouldn't move onto our other list, but I was just wanting to clarify that he is getting some costing on it anyhow.
No. If we leave it on the futures list, there will be no costing, no work done, and we won't see the light of day. At least for the year. We could always revisit it in the beginning of 2018. But
that's correct, yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
So I think that's important for council to know. So we're at a tipping point, right? So it could happen if council chooses to do that. So that's what you need to choose. And it could be, because I just checked with him and he had to leave. He had a family emergency, so that's why he's not here. So he's prepared and he's able to do that, but that becomes then the number one priority. That just means that if you're adding more things to it, there's something that's going to drop off at some point, right? So, but then it needs to be moved up onto the list if that's your number one.
For any work to be done on it, it can't be sitting in the future list. Okay, Councillor Zelka, please.
Thank you, Chair. If Cadbury Bay bike lanes could somehow be split in half, where we do just the Cadbury Bay area around the high school first in the short term in this mandate, and we look at Cadbury Bay further north or alternate routes further north, not necessarily Cadbury Bay, but more appropriate with respect to the Bowker Creek, the Bowker Cadbury Bay projects that are coming in, and there's various other developments that are coming in that may affect what actually gets done further north, Cadbury Bay and also further north by the golf courses. But if that could be split into two, I would be very much in favor of having the smaller aspect around the high school moving forward in the short term. Thank you.
Okay, the only way to do that, and it is an option, but the only way to do that is take it off the futures list, move it on to the main list, and then we will get a report back at some point. And at that point, we can look at phasing it over the next 2 to 3 years.
If that's the only way, then I support moving it onto the list.
And that is the only way, because we will not get a report on that unless it's on the higher list. Okay.
So that's what I'm hearing, Your Worship. We're going to move that up to the 17-18 strategic priority, subject to staff coming back with, resource timeline, estimate, and advice on the scope of the project.
Yes.
Okay. Other additions, Henderson Bike Lanes, Elgin to Bowker Pathway. Councillor Kirby, I think, was the only one who mentioned those two additional projects. Is there some consensus or a majority that those should also be added? Okay.
Doesn't look like it. Thank you.
Okay.
They will stay on the futures list.
Right. Yes, of course. I'm going to come back to the DCC project in a minute. In terms of the recommendations from the APC, what I was hearing from Councillor Murdoch was that the APC made 3 recommendations, but that for the purposes of staff moving forward with those, and I stand to be corrected, that we should be focusing on the housing strategy, and in fact, we should tackle that first and complete that by the end of the mandate. Was I hearing that correctly?
Councillor Murdoch, I think once the one, as you mentioned, put that forward.
It is, and that is correct. I guess in terms of time management today, however, we have recommendations from the APC. We have to, I think, ultimately decide how we're going to move this forward, probably with a bit more time and thought put into some of those suggestions. I don't think we should decide today that we're going to do secondary suites versus this or that. I guess I would like it sort of to be on that list and maybe just add it in terms of brackets. We have to decide the details, but that portion, which is already on here, in what was called infill strategy before, but I think is now in a bit of flux in terms of what's going to get accomplished in the next 2 years. So that's kind of where I'm at. I just don't want to spend another 45 minutes here trying to debate which we should do first and what we're going to call it. I think that might be better for a separate session than this. And I'll turn to Ms. Koning for some guidance on that.
What we could do is, and this is the number one, proactively support reason community growth and actions right now. It says implement residential infill priorities as directed by APC and council. So what we could do is implement or maybe review the recommendations of the APC made on the 11th, something like that. Then it would come back to council, and we could then prioritize that. Because I certainly would be one that would favor accepting some or all of the recommendations and prioritizing them of the APC. So would that suffice, that we would say that we would review and move forward on APC recommendations without having decided in which order and which of the three? No, is that too?
No, I think we need a little bit more specifics. I think the first thing is in its context. So we started down the road of an infill strategy. And I think that after the experiences of hearing from the public over the course of the last 6 months, Council wanted to have this revisited by the APC. So the APC has come back and has given you its recommendations in terms of 3 things that they see in terms of the next couple of years. So I think that they're recommending that to you, that secondary suites, regulating secondary suites, look at a zoning for duplexes, looking at gathering data for a housing strategy. So I think that what that means is that should council endorse those recommendations, then you need to just set some kind of priority. Otherwise, the 45-minute discussion will be with staff trying to figure out what do we think that council wants to be the 1, 2, or 3. The other part of that is this means that we would stop the project of the infill strategy, because I think you'll recall that we had some terms of reference for that project. We have engaged a consulting firm. It just means that then we have some idea of the conversations we need to have with those consultants to say, we're going to put this one on hold for the time being. We're not going to be following through on this. And then what are the resources, or where do we go in terms of costing out? Because do you want us to cost out for all 3, for 4? I think we need to have some indication from council, a bit of an order and a bit of a plan. Otherwise, we're left sort of trying to determine that.
Yep, and I think Councillor Murdoch's right. Given our time limits and our scope limits today, this may not be the forum to do that. But let's hear from Councillor Renee and then Croft, please.
Well, because I thought the CAO was saying they do need more direction, but so I'm a little confused right now, because I was going to start giving some feedback. Perhaps you could advise, Mr. Chair?
Well, I mean, if there is a consensus, for instance, that we want to accept the recommendations of the APC, subject to us prioritizing between 1, 2, and 3, I think that would be sufficient at this point, right? So in other words, accept the recommendation of the APC, subject to prioritizing them with the assistance of our staff report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the issue I have with prioritizing is that I would like to, I'm not clear myself whether how this works. Do we say we want all of this done, and ask staff to come back with a timeline and staged proposal? Or do we, is the staging of these recommendations a timed staging, or is it a priority about what's more important? And then second to that, I did understand, if I heard it correctly, the CAO said that this did not preclude the consideration of heritage conversions as well, which isn't actually in here. So perhaps you could,
part of
through
it
your
is
chair,
I-
ask.
Yeah. Helen?
So I think on this, I think part of the concern or the frustration is what are we able to do in the short period of time that we have, and with what resources? I think that there's consensus that all of these things need to be done. And so that was my point in terms of I didn't want to preclude or council to think that conversions wouldn't be looked at. It's just that we can't do all of these components at the same time. I think the other thing to remember, we only have limited resources in terms of staff, but we also have limited resources in terms of the public engagement process. So by going out and saying we're going to do 3 things all at the same time, I don't know that that's going to be a good process even for our public, because they're going to be confused about, are we doing this first, are we doing that second? So I think that part of it, as I said earlier, and I can't really speak for the APC because this question wasn't put to them, which one is first, second, or third. I'm making an assumption with what I heard was that the regulation of secondary suites was probably number one. That at some point, if that were to be complete, if there was an opportunity to work on the duplex. But maybe simultaneous with the with the secondary suites, we could, when we had time, to start gathering some of the information, having some preliminary discussion about what a housing strategy would look like.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thank you, Ms. Coney. So I then, if we're being asked to prioritize this, I would agree with the CAO about prioritizing secondary suites, both because we've said that in the OCP, and that is aligned with the strategic objectives of the regional growth strategy to regulate unregulated housing. So I would start there, and then after that, I would leave these are all like a top of my priority list in terms of realizing the infill strategy of the OCP, and I would leave it for staff to recommend to us about how that would play itself out, given their resources, expertise, and what would be needed to complete these infill strategies.
Thank you. So what I hear that suggestion is at this stage, we accept that we will proceed on APC recommendation 1, and we would seek input from staff on recommendation 2 and 3. Okay? Councillor Croft, please.
I'm sorry, I'm just really unclear about what our expectation is here today with this from the APC. If I don't think this has been already said by Councillor Murdoch, that this is not the place to discuss this fully, and so I'm not sure what staff is looking for at this point from us, other than saying, "Oh, this is great. We would like to include this in a more fulsome discussion." I don't think we should be prioritizing it at this strategic planning session. I think we need to have the opportunity to look at this in more detail, and maybe even have a presentation from the Advisory Planning Commission to tell us how they got here, so that we're not making some assumptions. So I'd like to include the recommendation as it stands, and then maybe we can talk about it later when we have the opportunity to do that. I'm finding this quite confusing today as to what direction you want from council today on this recommendation by the APC.
Okay, and would it be enough direction for us to agree today that we move away from the infill strategy, but towards the recommendation of the APC? Would that be sufficient at this point for you to bring back some suggestions for us on how to accomplish the APC recommendations? So at least we would have, yes, we're turning away from the infill, and yes, we're going towards the APC recommendations without details at this point.
So, two things. First of all, for an APC to make the recommendation, the council's the one that asked the APC for its recommendation. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about where that came from. And staff can go back and do some further sort of analysis. We don't even have a plan in terms of an outline of what these things would look like. But there, at some point, I think that council does need to make a decision so that we have an idea. It's just, if we had some kind of an indication, it would be where our efforts would go in terms of what we're looking at. Because I think that doing all those three things in the next 2 years are not going to be viable. But we can go back and we can make our best effort to bring it forward. And at some point, there does need to be a prioritization from council.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be today. Okay, so, but the decision to move from one direction to the other can be made today, and then the details of what that new direction would look like would be something that you'd bring back, and perhaps along with a meeting with APC. Okay, thank you. Councillor Murdoch, please.
If we're seeking consensus here on that, I can't give it. We've got a 3-point argument, one of which is to data gather another 30-odd items. I mean, I just look at, if we're gonna go down the path of secondary suites or higher density housing or anything else that we're gonna look at, and I think they all have to be on the table. you know, the whole failure to plan is to ensure failure model is in front of us here. If we're looking at possibly increasing density in one area, perhaps we don't have secondary suites allowed in that surrounding area as well to help compensate. I mean, there's all kinds of models here that we have to look at. And I think if we don't sit back a little bit and say, what are we trying to accomplish? And then what are some tools we have to accomplish that? We're just going to fail. We're going to go down a path. So I don't have an issue with the recommendations, but I think they're too small. I think if we're trying to accomplish something in the next 2 years, I would be happy if we came to we start with the broadest picture of OCP, that we get to the narrower one and map that to regions and to housing types. And then based on that, that would be a success for me this term. And then we would actually get into the details of writing bylaws and regulations around secondary suites and where they would exist and so forth. That to me is the right model. So I don't support this. I don't think that this model proposed of saying, well, we'll take the APCs and reorganize them, because I don't agree with that. I think we actually need to do a bigger picture and design a piece for the community to agree to. So I think we can leave this line item in here as a priority. We're going to do something around dealing with the OCP's guidelines around housing and density and infill and secondary suites. What that is, I think we have to leave vague at this point. And I apologize. I know you really would like to have us have more, but I fundamentally disagree with that. We just take and agree to those in principles. I just don't agree with it.
Okay, Councillor Nate, please.
I agree with Councillor Murdoch that as we move forward with implementing a secondary suite program, that all the things that he's talking around the characteristics of what that program would look like need to be done. But I would see that that is part of the process around the implementation of the secondary suite. And so on that note, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to put a motion forward that we prioritize. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just hang on.
Yeah, okay.
Just hang on to that for a minute, because
Okay.
we haven't been really doing motions. We've been doing kind of consensus.
Okay. Well, then,
and I saw there was a hand here for Councillor
okay,
Kirby.
but so just to finish my point,
Okay.
then I just would advocate that if staff is looking for some direction and we can't deal with all three of these, that we focus then on the secondary suites and ask staff to move that program forward as we've already agreed to in the OCP. That would be my view of this.
Okay. Councillor Kirby, succinctly. Councillor Zelka, equally succinctly afterwards, please, because we're looking at 3:45.
I think the key factor, or the key word in the whole secondary suites question is regulate secondary suites, which means they pre-exist. They're not something that we're going to be, it's not increasing density. It's not talking about an expansion of what we already have. It's just regulating what already exists. And I think that if we've got that direction from the community survey, we've got it from the OCP, we've heard it from, in the previous, or the follow-up survey, that we need to get on with things. And if we do it well, we'll do it within the context of a housing strategy that is begun at the same time. And I think, we're not going to do it as it would have been done 30 years ago. We'll do it as it's been done, more recently in a better context, and looking at what is the housing, what are the expectations as far as the regional growth strategy, what are our expectations as far as development, future development along corridors in, collector streets or arterials. I think we have that information now. I think it can be done well, and I think we really have to get started on looking at those bylaws, because that discussion has been going on since 2007, which means that's a decade of talking about it, when the rest of the region already has those bylaws in place. And I think the community's expectations, certainly in my neighborhood, where they'd be very pleased to do a pilot project in the Henderson area, and that came out loud and clear in the community surveys. More than 70% support that. I think we have to get moving. And, I expected that to begin in 2015. And we're now halfway through our mandate, and we haven't begun looking at the bylaws. So if we continue to talk about strategy, I think we'll drive our community mad with their expectations not being met.
Thank you. Councillor Zelka, please.
Thank you, Chair. I find myself supporting, in many ways, the APC recommendations. And I have to agree with Councillor Croft. It would be great to have a presentation from the APC to drill down into what each of these three recommendations actually means, so that I'm not making an assumption here. But based on what I believe these are, I'm fine to actually support them essentially in the order as presented. I like number 1 around the regulation of secondary suites. I'm not sure, I don't agree that it would only be for the existing unregulated ones. Once we regulate it, I'm sure there'll be more. And best practices means that probably would also regulate short-term rentals at the same time. So I see basically it being, from a holistic perspective, it'll bring in a regulation of an aspect that will actually help with housing affordability and helping people stay in their homes potentially, as in terms of meeting our sort of overall objectives. Number 2, the second item around the duplexes. What I love about that is that it actually helps with heritage conversions, which again helps to maintain the character of Oak Bay and potentially help with affordability. I like that. I see what the APC is trying to do with their recommendations to us. And number 3, the analytics and the key performance indicators. If there's any way of getting that in sooner instead of later, fantastic. But I understand that we only have so much capacity to do certain things. If this was in order, I'd be fine to do it in that order, one at a time. Thank you.
So we kind of have an idea of from Councillor Ney as to what one direction would look like, and that would is, if I can summarize it, to accept the recommendation number 1 and have staff report back on recommendation 2 and 3 in terms of capacity, timing, et cetera, and cost. Okay. What I'm going to ask Councillor Murdoch to do is just kind of articulate what he would see at this point. So, and then we have we can contrast. What would the direction that you're suggesting we give to Helen and company look like?
My suggestion would be that we agree that we are going to keep the next stage of the housing plan as following on the OCP in place. It is a priority. What that looks like, I would like to have a discussion with the Advisory Planning Commission, and the reasons for the recommendations, and have a discussion as a council as to what that priority is within that list. That's where I see it. I don't feel comfortable at this point that that's based on a written, very short piece from APC that this is the right answer, but it may be. But I think until we have had a more fulsome discussion, it's not positive. I think we can do one thing, let's do one thing, or maybe 2 things, but let's do them well. We've got a year and a half or so to do it. I'd like to have it done, so, but we have to decide what that is. I don't think saying that secondary suites right now is the right thing. I mean, is it the most urgent? Is that regulatory process and so forth? They exist already. They exist in this sort of weird quasi-state, but some reasonable level of functionality for decades now. And so is there a reason that we have to jump forward on that one versus trying to come up with them? And again, part of this is just, I think the community would have much greater acceptance of things like regulating secondary suites and other aspects of infill models and so forth if there's a plan to go with it. And that people understand that this area would be allowed to have duplexes, this area would be allowed to have secondary suites. I think if people see the overall piece, there's going to be broader acceptance of it. But that's just where I come from. But I'd like to have the discussion. I don't want to get there yet. I think as long as we have it in here that it is a priority, we understand it's going to be a planning department, we understand it's going to be a lot of work, whether it's secondary suites or it's going to be more of a housing strategy or what have you. But I think for today, yes, keep it in there, and let's discuss the details of it with the Advisory Planning Commission once we understand what that actually looks like.
So when you say yes, keep it in there, what we have now is implement residential infill priorities as directed by APC and Council. So just leave that the way it is?
You can take out the infill strategy and replace it with
residential housing priorities.
OCP follow-on or something, yeah, residential housing priority, whatever.
Okay.
Call it something, but I understand that.
Can I take a stab at this?
You certainly can, Gary.
So what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that for the purposes of the next draft of this document, we clearly leave in implement official community plan priorities as directed by the AP. We can wordsmith all that. and that what we would essentially, that you're looking for direction from staff in regards to the resource, timeline, prioritization implications of really these four components of secondary suites, legal nonconforming duplexes, housing strategy, and heritage conversions. So you'd be looking for staff to come back with advice, but in terms of, you know, keeping this on the work plan for 2017-18, it definitely stays in there. So the only one question I would ask is, I'm hearing that there may be majority support for, that's all good, we'll provide further advice down the road in regards to the prioritization, but we're good as council for focusing it out of the gate on the regulation of secondary suites, or is that saying too much? That you basically just bookmark it, it's a placeholder in there, and you're looking for advice on us in terms of what we pick off first? Or do we pick off first regulation of secondary suites and then provide advice later in terms of the rest of the stuff?
We have had a number of debates over the years about how do we prioritize these things and we've kind of gone in one direction, and there's talk about going in another direction, maybe now a third direction. Helen, from your perspective, what the suggestion is quite an open-ended on the one hand versus more specific on the other. Is there is there enough direction for you if it were to be implement residential housing priorities as directed by APC and council, as an example, to allow you to bring something back that focuses on the APC recommendations and perhaps the wider scope as it's being suggested by Councillor Murdoch?
I think that what I can do is I can go back with staff and we could put together a little mapping of the timeframes and the costs for each one of those three priorities of the APC. I don't know that I have a clear indication where council is heading, because that's a decision that I leave that with you in terms of the priority. I don't know where we're starting with this. What I think I am hearing is that we're not doing the infill yet. I may be the only one here. I'm not sure where I would start, and if I'm struggling with that, you have to give me some clarity.
Well, if we take out, trying to find a compromise here, if we take out the word infill from the first line, just take that out, don't replace with anything, and it is directed by APC, we know what their three recommendations are, that would give you at least a start to bring something back, and during that conversation, we could then widen the scope, if that's what the consensus is, or keep the scope fairly narrow with the way APC. Would that work for you? Just take out that word for now and then go to the next stage? Okay, how do we feel about that? Yes?
I think I appreciate what you're trying to do, Mr. Mayor, create consensus, but there's some things that I'm concerned that this is getting drawn out, because some of my colleagues are clear, they're not in agreement, they're not in alignment with moving forward. I've heard Councillor Murdoch say that this is a top priority. I've also heard you say that secondary suites are okay unregulated as is, so I'm confusing. I've heard you also say you would prioritize the housing strategy. So I'm confused about what is being suggested here. I mean, I've heard some council colleagues say that they would like to move forward with the development of a secondary suite program, which would include a planning process. Of course it would. That's what we would ask staff to do. So I think a little bit what we're struggling with here is that we have some difference of opinions at the council table about what to do with these housing priorities. And I am hearing a number of us agree with what the APC has put forward. I am okay to sit and have a discussion with the APC if that's where it begins. But I don't want to see this being drawn out over a long period of time. It's time for us to put this in place, to start implementing the OCP. It's been 2 years since we began this term that we said that we would do this. And we've got the support of our community to do that. And to keep drawing out and backpedaling on this is confusing to our community. I think it's challenging for our staff. And personally, as a counselor, it's very frustrating.
Well, I'm not sure it's backpedaling. I think it's forward pedaling to widen the scope, but that's a matter of semantics. So I think we have two choices, by the sounds of it. One choice is to take out the word infill in the current listing, and which I think achieves what people want, because it says there, implement residential priorities as directed by APC and council, and we will give those further directions when we get a report back on 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so if someone else can reword that, I'd be more than happy to hear it.
Well, Your Worship, I'd propose that, the message that I'm getting is it stays in as an action. You're definitely wanting to see work done on this, these recommendations in 17-18. The scope, the magnitude, the timeline, the prioritization is up for discussion, and you're looking for staff to come back with some advice. But in the meantime, we need to scope this out in further detail.
Yes, I think what I hear is a little more specific from Councillor Ney, saying we're wanting to agree on number 1 recommendation from APC, and then get recommendations on 2 and 3. I think that's the difference. Is that where we're stuck? Okay.
So the first thing to prioritize is secondary suites.
That's what I hear, but I think that's where the division is. But again, this form is not set up for that details. We don't have a report in front of us. We don't have a full understanding what the APC is coming from. In particular, all we have from them is really the 3 motions, and we don't have the kind of their background thinking. So it strikes me that no harm is done by just at this point taking out the word infill, and then I think we can all bring back when the report comes back, bring back to our views to the table. Some of us want number 1 to be the top priority, and then we'll talk about 2 and 3. Did I see somebody waving at me? Councillor Zelka, and then I think we have to move forward on this.
Oh, thank you, Chair. If your suggestion to just drop that one word leads to not necessarily just a report, of course, but also maybe some meeting of the minds between the Commission and Council, whether probably a co-meeting, I don't know what it would look like, but some way where the Commission does a presentation on this. If we could lead to that, maybe in time for estimates, because I'm not quite sure how staff is gonna recommend estimates based on what we've just possibly not agreed on. Thank you.
Yeah, I would hope it would be earlier in advance of estimates, so we can do something at estimates. But okay, so right now, it's subject to what anyone else has a suggestion. We'll take out the word infill, and we'll move ahead. Or if someone else wants to propose another wording, I'm prepared to hear that. I don't see that. That's what we're going to do then. Thank you.
Okay, I think three more things to talk about, hopefully fairly quickly. Addition. There was discussion about, I think, Councillor Braithwaite, revision of the uplands bylaws. Take that from future priority, in other words, post 2018, and put it into 2017-18.
Let me speak to this as I haven't before. I think it's important, no question about that. It's a big piece of work also. There's no question about that either. I think we really have to focus on implementation of the OCP before we get to this. So I certainly would not support this at going forward the next 2 years, but leaving it on the futures initiative, because I just don't think we can do both. I really, and it'd be quite controversial. RS1, RS2 changes and revisions. It's so particularly since we have the HCA going forward too, which is another large piece of planning work, and perhaps I think it has a greater priority. And not only that, but we do have some controls already in place in the uplands. Okay.
Is that the, I wouldn't say consensus, but majority opinion of council?
Councillor, well, it's going to start with you, Councillor Murdoch, because I think I'm going to start with you, Councillor Murdoch, because I think you raised it first of all, and then we'll go to Councillor Zelko.
Yeah, I raised it. It was put forward to the group, and it got dropped down as by the majority at the previous planning session. I accepted that. I think, and I understand it. I do think it's fundamental that our bylaws reflect what we want, and we've had one instance that a house was well within the bylaws that came to council, and we, as council, determined it was nowhere near suitable for the things, which strikes me that means our bylaws are substantively out of whack with what we as representing the community see as appropriate. So to me, that's fundamentally core to our responsibility as a council and as a municipality, is to make sure our bylaws reflect what we want. Granted, we do have the Special Powers Act, but it's fundamentally, to my mind, unfair to applicants to go through and comply with all the bylaws and have it turned down at the very end of the process because we don't like it. I think the bylaws should at least be closer to what we're expecting. So I do feel that's very important. I'm okay with it being taken off. However, when this came back, again, under the APC's recommendations, number 2, zoning for duplexes, which is, again, true. It's recognizing that we have a number of legal non-conforming duplexes out there that, because of their non-conforming status, it's awkward for them to do any renovations and so forth because they don't comply under our current zoning bylaws. That being said, if I had to sort of prioritize between those two things, I would much rather focus on the uplands, which has a much more substantive impact than on worrying about the very small number of duplexes. And frankly, we've already approved a number of new duplexes, and I don't think anybody who has a duplex now would be concerned about coming forward and asking for changes within those bylaws. So it got brought up again today by me because I saw that on there. And if we're going to spend staff time on changing bylaws, I would much rather do it on the uplands, where it has a much broader impact. And I think it's more important for fairness for applicants than it is for duplexes. But that's why it came back again.
Okay, Councillor Zelko.
Thank you, Chair. I agree. As a result of the OPE Special Powers Act, Council, unlike other councils, have an ability to deal with this on a one-off basis, as we did with that one property earlier on. So I would be fine to not add it at this time, although it is important. I would continue to encourage planning and building staff to hand out copies of the provincial legislations. It is not available online. Thank you very much.
Councillor Kirby.
Very quickly, I'll just say that I understand and completely agree with you that it does need updating. When I look at there's 400 homes in the uplands approximately, and then the majority of the homes are in the rest of Oak Bay. That's where I think we should focus our efforts, on the majority of the homes where those bylaws, all of our bylaws are outdated. We really do need to address everything, but the majority is outside the uplands, and I think that's where we will have the most impact.
Thank you. I don't think there's consensus to add it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Oak Bay Village Neighborhood Plan. This would be a formal neighborhood plan from my perspective, from my understanding.
Again, I'll add my comment to here. In the report that we got from Ms. Koning, there is a line in there, reaching for the wrong report. All right. They got so many reports on the go here. There is a line in there that talks about bringing forward the 2 premises that we own in the village. I think as a preliminary, we need to get that report. We need to think about it. So I would think that we might want to put this back on keep it on the futures list and consider raising it for 2018, depending on what our decisions are with respect to those 2 houses. The village plan will be huge. We've talked over the years about widening sidewalks, improving the walkability, the bikeability in that area. We also have to look at parking, all kinds of issues. So I think it's premature to go down, to put this back up until we've had that report from staff. So I saw some hands. Councillor Zelka, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. This was my recommendation, and I agree with you. It probably is premature. As long as we move forward with the Hampshire House and looks like asset management, as long as those get completed, I'm fine to do the larger planning later. Thank you.
And given that you were the one who put it back up, I take it there's no consensus for anyone else at this point. So thank you very much.
DCC project. This was more clarification potentially. What I was hearing is that there's probably majority support of council to proceed with a DCC project, but you would like the engineering department and the engineer to really take into consideration some of the scope issues that were discussed. Greenways, for example, and there were a couple of other items that you would like to get a better understanding of the scope of the project. But in terms of moving forward in 17, we would be proceeding with the DCC project.
And I'll speak on this to begin with. I don't think that this has a greater priority than the bikeway and what's the other one? Speed limits. I think this is a third priority compared to that. I think it's going to be a lot of work for not a lot of money coming in. I don't disagree with Councillor Murdoch's position on, you know, most of the DCCs are from bare land or new constructions. We're not going to be seeing a lot of those. That's number one. Number two, I think we can achieve some of these greenway things through our amenities for larger projects. So there's maybe a different way to do it. I'd prefer to explore that than have engineering focus on this, because it will take their focus away from what I see as the two other priorities. Having said all of that, we may want to keep it on there, and then when the bikeways issue comes back from engineering, I'd like to hear what they have to say in terms of, if we take DCC off, would that allow them to do speed and bikeways, Cadbury bikeways? So it may be just from a strategic point of view when you're asking them, can you do all three? And if not, of the three, I would drop DCC. I'm not that keen on it. It's not going to bring in that much revenue, I think. Councillor Ney and then Murdoch, please.
Mr. Mayor. I agree with your reasoning, Mr. Mayor, but what I would like to know, because I don't have a lot of familiarity with what this DCC bylaw could or could not do, and I would like to have a staff report providing us with information about the scope of the work that would be entailed and the return to the community given its current composition. So I'd like to know what value this could offer to our community weighed up against the amount of work that would be entailed. So I'd be looking for a staff report to better inform us to make a decision.
Well, we do have a consulting report that's has been on the agenda. We've been told this is going to cost rough estimate $50,000, some staff time of a little over a week, and then some more work. So it isn't an insignificant. If this was just a few hours off the side of someone's desk, I'd say yes. But $50,000 plus over a week of staff time may not be something we might want to divert that money to bikeways. I think I saw Councillor Murdoch's hand, and then Councillor Kirby. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Well, I raised this as not being sure if it was worth doing. However, I was quite satisfied with the answers that Director Horan gave. At this point, they're putting together the information to get an assessment of what the growth would look like and what that would mean in terms of things, and they're a very minimal cost to come back to sort of phase 2 to come back and let us know and make the recommendation whether it's worth going forward with. That's what I heard. Perhaps staff can confirm that, but if that's the case, I'm very happy to leave it on there, because I think that's the information we need to make a logical decision.
So really, it's just completing a little bit of work at this point before we engage the consultant and a large amount of further work. Is that be kind of
Mr. Chair, we
asterisked?
would estimate that it'd be somewhere in the $5,000 to $7,500 range to get to that next phase. There's a fair amount of work to get to that, to actually produce the information that you need to actually then go ahead and prepare a bylaw. But you wouldn't have to spend $50,000. We could do that first phase and have a sense then of what kind of return you might expect.
Okay, so with that asterisk on
Stays on.
there, DCC Phase 1, if we can call it that. Oh, this would be, you're right, sorry, we've already done Phase 1. So don't go on to Phase 3, which might be bigger dollars, okay? Councillor Kirby,
I've just
please.
been made aware this week, the open house for a development in our community, that we would be receiving about $178,000 from that development should it go forward. And so, to me, if that, if we divide that by the number of proposed suites, that's 43, that's about $5,000 a suite. And in Langford, for DCCs, they're getting about $6,000 per suite. I feel like we're already there, and that we do receive those amenities and the funds from developers already. I like the idea of formalizing it and making sure that we do get a return on investment, and that they are, providing monies towards sewer and water and the amenities that they do rely on for those developments. But excuse me, but if to put that ahead of projects that have been on the go for a decade, to me is just not worthwhile. Thank you. Excuse me.
If you're not able to talk any further,
The barrels
that's
of
okay.
trying to sneak an apple while we're finishing up here.
All right, thank you. All right, so is there consensus that we can leave Phase 2 on? And so that's a rather minimal before, and any Phase 3 would be brought back to us.
We'll leave on reduced scope of work.
That's right. Is that fair?
Okay.
Yep, go ahead, please. Councillor Zelko.
The point of this is to raise funds for other initiatives, and is it possible to just get a clarification? What is our community amenities policy or our bylaw? Is there a particular percentage that we actually ask for from every development, or is it negotiated every time?
What I'm going to suggest is that be brought back.
As part of?
That be brought back when we have that discussion.
That would be helpful, thank you.
Because I don't know if, talking about it now, we'll just have to repeat it, but I think it is an important question in the overall scope of things. How we doing, Gary?
Well, I think that's it. Have we captured everything here?
I think we have.
I think we've discussed everything in terms of potential additions, deletions, reduced scope of work. I'm relatively clear. Is the staff relatively clear?
Okay. I think it's, I think it's
Okay.
gone really well. The only other one then, Gary, is that protocol. And I think what I'm going to suggest is that we just see very quickly around the table if there's any major additions or deletions from that protocol. And if not, when it comes back to council, we can always do little minor tweaks, but we need to hear at this point if there's any major roadblocks or showstoppers. And no? Councillor Croft? No. Councillor Murdoch? No. Councillor Nate? No. Councillor Zelka? Okay, so no still shop. Let me see if I can say that appropriately. No showstoppers. Okay, so that's that part of the agenda.
Okay, so there's consensus in principle anyway that
Absolutely.
council's comfortable with this policy protocol? Okay.
So now we're on the concluding remarks one.
Well, Your Worship,
there more?
basically I've already, I went through this at the very beginning in terms of next steps, that obviously there's a few items that we're going to have to talk about internally with among the staff. There's a couple of scope issues and clarification issues. I think I'm relatively clear in what's in and what's out. We'll have to talk timing in terms of revisions to the document. But the objective, as I said, would be bring it forward to a regular council or committee of the whole meeting, not to a further workshop like this, with basically, there may be an accompanying staff report, some clarification on some of these issues, but we'd post notice of that meeting, give the public an opportunity to comment, and that subject to any comments that the public may have or any final changes that council would make, we'd really be looking for a motion to adopt, a formal motion to adopt, ratify, whatever you call it, at that meeting. And then that would go on the website, and you do quarterly check-ins and maybe a session like this next year.
I think that's a good summary of the next steps. Obviously, the one issue that was contentious here today had to do with the direction of housing strategy versus secondary suite strategy, and that's something that we need to just reflect on, and I'm going to ask staff maybe to come back to maybe next week to just reflect on the sequencing. Do we try to sort that out before we go to the next step with the priorities? Or do we wait until after we set those priorities? And I'm not expecting an answer here. So in other words, should the next step be for us to have a session on the issue of secondary suites versus housing strategy before we finalize the overall strategic direction document, or should it be the other way around? So that's something maybe that we'll leave the staff to think about, and we can bring that forward at our next council meeting, which would be just a little over a week from now. So I want to thank all our the councillors for, I think it's been a very productive day. And I think we have, other than one or two little areas, important areas, I think we have a very good direction going forward. I want to thank staff for putting it together. I think after November 4th, we felt a little bit at sea. I think we're a lot more steady at this point. And we have a great plan for moving forward. Still some issues that we have to discuss, but there always is. So thank you very much, staff, for being here and participating not only today, but leading up to today. And I know there was a lot of work. And finally, thanks to the audience who were here all this time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Move adjournment.
And with that, I moved and seconded for adjournment. Discussion, all in favor, opposed, not opposed. Thank you very much. Thank you.